Looking at some of the other things here, looking at the track errors, I haven't included them all out to 120, which is 5 days, but only out to 3 days or 72 hours. You can see that the track error in 2005 at 72 hours was 106 nautical miles, and it was 100. It's going to be 100 this year, so quite a bit smaller. At 48 hours, it was 124 nautical miles as opposed to only 67, so almost cut in half in 20 years here at that 48-hour position, and down to 24 hours ahead of time. The track error was 56 nautical miles in 2005, and then down to 39 this year. So you can really see how those track errors have gotten smaller over the years. Other things that have changed are satellite resolution. Really, what we have now really enables us to really get a good view of the storm. We had decent satellite imagery back in 2005, but with the satellite that was launched in 2015 or so, 2016, that satellite gives us much more channels to look at. So we can see different layers of the storm, and we get much better resolution, both in time and space, from the satellites that we have now. So much better satellite imagery. There's a series of graphics. For example, the timing graphics. NHC now produces time of arrival for tropical storm force winds. We didn't have that. Really helps in the planning stage now. Watches and warnings. The lead times were 36 and 24 hours. For both tropical storm watches and warnings and for hurricane watches and warnings. Now it's up to 48 and 36. So we're way more confident in the forecast to be able to give more lead time in the warnings for these different systems. And then for sure the amount of social science now that goes into developing these products, there was some back then, nowhere near the amount of social science that goes into developing new products now. So there's all kinds of focus group testing to see what people understand the best, and then they go with that particular product to convey all the different types of information related to hurricanes. There's a much longer list than this, but in the interest of time, I kept it to some of the ones that pop out the most. So we've come a long ways since the capabilities that we had during the 2005 record season and during Hurricane Katrina in terms of forecasting. So with that, we'll kind of shift our focus now to look ahead at what we might expect for this hurricane season. So this is something I show pretty much every year, and it's a good representation of how the season gets influenced by water temperature in the Atlantic and wind shear in the Atlantic. So wind shear, we know that wind shear in the Atlantic tends to be higher in the wintertime. Then it starts to drop off in the summer. It bottoms out in August into early September. In terms of water, and that wind shear is a very important factor in the development of hurricanes. If there's more wind shear, you get fewer hurricanes. Less wind shear, you get more hurricanes, everything else being equal. And we know that these storms get their energy from the warm water. So the water heats up over the course of the spring and summer, peaks actually in September, and then starts to drop off again. So the peak of hurricane season is nestled right in between these two peaks, the minimum of wind shear and the maximum of water temperature. So some of the indicators that we look at, obviously for water temperature in the Atlantic, we look at sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic. If at the seasonal time scale, we want to get an idea if whether or not there's going to be more or less shear in the Atlantic, we look at water temperatures in the Pacific. And that gives us an indication of the wind shear that we will get over the course of the season in the Atlantic. So this is the map that I showed at last hurricane conference last year. So we were looking at El Nino condition, so warmer water in this rectangle here in the Pacific, but we were rapidly heading towards a La Nina. When the water in here is warm, we tend to get more wind shear in the Atlantic and fewer hurricanes. When the water in here is cooler, we tend to get less wind shear than average in the Atlantic, therefore allowing for more hurricanes to develop. Meanwhile, looking at water temperature in the Atlantic, we were looking at record water level, record water temperatures at this time last year. So if we look at this year, nowhere near as high a temperature anomaly that we're seeing this year as opposed to last year. In the Pacific, it's kind of in between. It's not really, and we're officially still in the La Nina that was left over from last year, but it's kind of going into what we call a neutral condition. So the water is slightly warmer in the Atlantic, and about neutral in the Pacific. So what are the predictions for this as we head into hurricane season? All these are models of water temperature in the Pacific in this box right here. So pretty much every model has us right into that neutral condition. So neither El Nino, there's one model that shows that. La Nina, there are a few models that show us going back to, or at least remaining as El Nino, La Nina into the peak of hurricane season, which is in this box here, which is the peak of hurricane season of August, September, and October. So if we look at the official prediction for that, there's a 50% chance it'll be in neutral conditions, 34% chance, about a 1 in 3 chance that will stay in La Nina, and then only a 16% chance that we'll see an El Nino by the peak of hurricane season. So now let's look at water temperature in the Atlantic. So I showed that water temperature anomalies are not as high as what they were last year at this time. However, most of the models do predict some more warming. You would essentially expect warming as we head into the spring and summer, but that warming is going to increase that temperature anomaly as we head into August, September, and October. This is the more aggressive one. This is from our Canadian CANSIPS model, but the European model and the US model also predict growing positive temperature anomalies. So that water temperature is going to get progressively more warmer than the average as we head into hurricane season. So looking at all the factors together, warm water looks like it is what is going to be the main driver for hurricane season this year. If we look at La Nina, El Nino, it doesn't seem to be that's going to be a big factor in adding or subtracting storms. We are already in a period of high hurricane activity, and we expect that to continue. That's over a very long period of time, several decades. So with that, these are some of the numbers that have been issued so far in terms of expected storms. Tropical storm risk, they're a group from Europe. Basically, they're expecting an average hurricane season. The average is 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. And you can see that these folks at tropical storm risk are bang on the average. Colorado State University with Dr. Phil Klotzbach, who is attending the conference. He issued his outlook a couple of weeks ago, and they're looking at anywhere from 14 to 20 named storms, 7 to 12 of those becoming hurricanes, and 2 to 6 becoming major hurricanes. Weather Bell, which is a private company, they're also looking at 15 to 19 named storms. The ECMWF, the folks that run the European model, they're looking at 16 named storms, 7 hurricanes. That's up to the end of October. That doesn't even count what might form in November. So all in all, what the overall prediction looks like it's going to be this year is for an average to slightly above average hurricane season in terms of the number of storms, but not quite as active as what we saw last year. So, regardless of what these numbers are, think average to above average season, average to slightly above average season for this hurricane season. I suspect that the other agencies who do issue these outlooks will come up with very similar numbers over the course of the next few weeks, and NOAA issues theirs at the end of May. So this is the list of names that we're going to use this year. Andrea, Barry, Chantal. For those who remember Dorian from 6 years ago, that name was replaced with Dexter. So Dexter replaces Dorian, and you can see the rest of the names there. If we do run out of names, there is that supplemental list that we can use, and that does not change from year to year. That's the same list that we use just in case we run out of names. So with that, I'd like to wrap up, but I would again like to thank everyone for your attention, and thank you for your reports that you send in. As a weather forecaster myself, just getting the reports that you guys send in, sometimes you may not know how important a report is, but for us, you might not know it, but for us, it might fill a gap, a very important gap, and it may be wind speed, it may be wind direction, it may be amounts of precipitation, but you never know when your piece of information is going to be the missing piece that we're looking for to complete our picture of the storm so we can do a better job at providing forecasts and warnings so people can protect themselves from these storms. So again, thank you very much for your contribution to hurricane safety, and thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bob. We really appreciate what you do up there in Canada. And next, we're going to have a statement from the director of the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Michael Brennan. And let me bring that up here, if I can. Alrighty, so this is the National Hurricane Center's director. And I've got the wrong video up. Let me see if I can get that one up here.
Hi, this is Mike Brennan coming to you here from the home of our amateur radio station, WX4NHC.
I will get this to show somehow here. It's not a PowerPoint, it's an actual video. You want to see how you can get that one up here? No. It's an independent video he sent a few days ago. And we apologize, but most of the staff from the Hurricane Center were not allowed to travel at the last minute. So.
Hi, this is Mike Brennan coming to you here from the home of our amateur radio station, WX4NHC.
Still on extended screen. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So go hit the F5, I guess. Appreciate your patience. We're trying to get all these different videos that came in, and they're in different formats, and that's why we're having to switch formats here. And from what we understand so far with this new situation. Most of the people at the Hurricane Center are still the same people and will remain there. Okay, so is this ready to go, Jim?
Okay. There we go. Okay.
Hi, this is Mike Brennan coming to you here from the home of our amateur radio station, WX4NHC, here at the National Hurricane Center. Just wanted to say a few words. Hi, this is Mike Brennan coming to you here from the home of our amateur radio station, WX4NHC, here at the National Hurricane Center. Just wanted to say a few words about how important this amateur radio effort and program is here at NHC. It's been going on now for 45 years, all the way back to 1980. And if you think back to the 2024 hurricane season and how impactful it was across the Atlantic Basin with 10 hurricane landfalls, 5 of those happening in the United States, the amateur radio station here at NHC is really one of our vital links to communicate with affected areas. They can provide us with reports of damage, meteorological observations, and just enable communications between forecasters here at NHC and those in affected areas when there are no other ways to communicate, when power is out, when traditional communications have failed. So that amateur radio station and that presence here at NHC is really vital to make sure that we can get those critical key observations when they're in a timely fashion and get them to the forecasters so that they can help make those decisions. So just wanted to say those words as you all gather here at the National Hurricane Conference this week. And I particularly want to thank Julio. This is going to be his last year helping to run the station here at NHC. He's had 45 years of service that he's dedicated to this effort over the tenure of more than 10 Hurricane Center directors. So I just really want to thank him for his efforts and wish you a great week at the conference. Thanks.
Okay, so I need to then switch this. And then go back to the other format. I think I may need you, Jim. This is not working.
Here's Skype.
Yep.
Skype. There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. Too many different formats and too many different things here.
Okay. And my name's Julio Ripoll. My call sign's WD4R. I'm the co-founder of the amateur radio at the National Hurricane Center back in 1980. It was supposed to be a 2-year assignment, and this is my 45th year. And I stayed this long because a lot of what I see that the staff is doing over there is actually working and saving lives, and it's very important. So hopefully we'll be over this atmosphere like a hurricane in the next season or so, and we'll get back to normal. So my presentation is of the station at the Hurricane Center and our operators and how we interface with the National Hurricane Center staff. And let's see, there we go. I wanted to mention Rob Macedo. He is in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and he typically organizes this event, and he's the moderator, but at the last minute he could not fly out of Massachusetts. But I wanted to show him because I really appreciate everything he does to put this together, and of course our talented Jim Palmer, KB1KQW, who came down here even though he's on the verge of running the effort for the Boston Marathon next week. So I mean, he's under a lot of stress with all that stuff. Anyway, so back in the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, this is what we saw quite a lot. We had very little activity. And we were like, wow, I'm glad that it was happening. But the 2024 season is the opposite. It's one of the most active seasons on record. And it had a total of 18 named storms, and you can see most of them are crossed off. And we had 11 hurricanes, 5 reaching major hurricane strength, and Hurricane Beryl was one that, the earliest hurricane in history to reach Category 5 in the Atlantic. So this is basically Beryl when it went into the Gulf, and how it just bloomed very quickly because the Gulf waters are so warm. And then even after many years of not having hurricanes, if you have just one hurricane like we did in 1992, that'll hit a coastal area, that's enough to cause a tremendous amount of damage. And this is the 2025 season hurricane names, and they're predicting a very busy season. And the fortunate thing about this is we're not going to use the Greek names anymore. It causes a lot of confusion because the Greek alphabet does not follow the way that we alphabetize our alphabet, and that causes a lot of confusion. So when we have a hurricane warning, get your best helper to help you put up your shutters, protect your vehicles, buy the foods that you need to keep for a while, buy some extra supplies of stuff that runs out of the shelf real quick, and we learned about that during the pandemic. And now with the tariffs, there's rumors that that will go too, because the Canadians supply most of the softwood that we make toilet paper from. And of course here in New Orleans, make sure you have your beignets. Okay. So real briefly, who we are and what we do. And we started here in this building, which was across the street from the University of Miami. And we were on the 6th floor of a high-rise building. And it doesn't make quite sense, but that's how we started. And you can see the shutters on the 6th floor. So if the windows on the floors above broke, that happened during Andrew. Anyway, we started in a real humble setup, and Dr. Neil Frank, who you'll see here, was the one that went to the university and said, we need a ham radio operator to come and put up a station there because we can't talk to the islands when the islands get hit with a hurricane. And I just happened to be the president of the Amateur Radio Club at the UM at the time, and I said, sure, why not? He says, well, do you meet the qualifications? I said, well, I live across the street from the Hurricane Center in the dorms. I have a ham radio and a cardboard box, and that's what I did for the first year. I'd actually take my ham radio in a cardboard box with some other stuff in a wire, and I'd set it up on the forecaster's desk. And later on in the early 80s, we thought, well, what if we get hit with a direct hurricane? What do we do with the station? So we built our first go kit. And you can see it there. It was a nice big aluminum box with a bunch of equipment in it. And it never went anywhere because it weighed about 200 pounds. So not a good go kit for anything. Then in 1992, Hurricane Andrew hit south of us. We did not get a direct hit. The Hurricane Center was on US 1, and it was probably about 20 miles south where it went over Homestead and the Turkey Point nuclear plant, and caused a tremendous amount of damage down there. But the Hurricane Center did get damages, so we had water leaks, we had windows blown, we had equipment that didn't work anymore, and the Doppler radar, which is the big white ball you saw on top of the building, blew away, and some of the generators we had on the roof blew down to the parking lot. So we were out of power, out of radar, but we had ham radio. So in 1995, the government wisely thought that maybe the Hurricane Center for the whole country should be in a hurricane-proof building. And I was lucky enough to be invited to review the design plans for the new Hurricane Center. And it's designed to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, and there are 2 rooms that will withstand an EF5 tornado. They're 20-inch thick concrete steel reinforced walls and ceiling, and they're disguised as bathrooms. So the rumor is if you see everybody running to the bathroom at the same time, it's a bad tornado. So, and at the same time that we were moving into the building and we ran probably a couple thousand feet of coax for our antennas, we had the busiest season so far in 1995. And so we were manning the radios, staffing our station, and running wires, and also working all these storms that were coming up. And but we made it through, and we have now 7 antennas up on the roof, and believe it or not, our 2 main antennas are dipoles. They're wire antennas, and they survived 2 hurricanes so far, where all the dishes you see there blew away. So Wilma was one of them, and Irma was another one. But our wire antennas, they flex, and that's all we needed. So this is our station now, and we started with a Yaesu FD101EX. It's a big box with 4 sweep tubes that glowed red when we turned it on and made a lot of heat and all that. And we kept partnering with Yaesu, and we have never asked or received $1 from the US government. It's all been commercial companies donating radios, and that's why I'm here, because they didn't have to pay for me to come here. But this is our radio system, and we have a lot of UHF and VHF radios that are basically automated. We have a system called SARNet, and then of course we use Echolink, IRLP, WinLink, and then of course HF and VHF and APRS. And most of those systems are automated. So when you get on some of these systems and you send us a report, it does come in automatically, printed out, but we do have to review them. Myself and my other coordinator, we do have to look at those reports and make sure they're complete and they're not completely, the estimates aren't wrong, because the forecasters there don't have the time to feed through 10,000 reports and pick out which ones are accurate. And these are all the ham radio operators that we used to have. We were up to 33, and that would volunteer their time to drive out there, sit in front of the radio. And by the way, they're all background checked, because this is a federal building. And yes, ham radio operators did pass the federal background check. Okay, there's still a few. But unfortunately, after this picture was taken about 10 years ago, we've lost almost half of them because they either passed away, moved away, and some of them just quit. But we're still moving on, and you can see our some of our station there and some of our operators that were working through the night. And we would have sometimes, depending on the storm where it's hitting and the number of reports, we could have up to 4 operators working at one time. But that doesn't mean that we're always there listening to every single frequency. Sometimes you have to come through the networks, and the nets like the Hurricane Watch Net, the VoIP Net, are some of the 2 main ones that we use. Then during the coronavirus, we did something that we had never done before. We started doing remote operations. And that was not easy at the beginning because we had never done it. We didn't know how we can interface their equipment with our home equipment and be able to pass messages through and all that. So we did a lot of experiments, and we came up with a system with the help of the Hurricane Center technicians where we can work from home, gather all the information. We sent it through a special system that they have. And then from there, it goes directly to the desk of the hurricane forecaster. And as soon as I hit send, in a minute, it's there. And sometimes I get a phone call and go like, get some more information from this guy. I'll tell you that story later. Purpose and goals: collect the weather data, surface reports, and I'll tell you how important they are and the difference they make. Provide backup communication for the Hurricane Center, and we've done that before. And I'll give you an example of that where everything else failed. All their satellite equipment, their trunked lines, the backup systems, the AWOPs and AWIPs didn't work, but ham radio got through. And we then we're there if needed to provide the hurricane advisories, and that's happened several times where a station, the Yucatan, in a little village, had no information, has no internet, and it was Hurricane Michelle that we were basically getting reports, surface reports from people in that area where the waters from the Campeche Bay had retracted. And now the bottom of the bay was exposed. And the villagers all went in there, you know, gathering shells and crabs and whatever. And when I told Max Mayfield what was happening, he had a panic attack, and he wrote a special emergency communications and asked the government to get everybody out of there, because the water doesn't come back very slowly. It comes back like a wave. So that does help. And then, of course, we promote and enhance the accuracy of the surface report. And when I say surface, it doesn't all have to be weather. It could be eyewitness reports as well. I'll give you a few examples of that. And our main mission is to help save lives. You know, we don't directly save lives, but we help the people who can help save lives. So how do you work during hurricane season? We have a lot of input. We don't just talk on one channel. Some people say, yeah, we couldn't hear you because of the propagation. I'm talking as if you were all hams. I think you, most of them. If you don't understand, you can ask me a question. But basically what happens, just so she understands, the hams take a radio on a lower frequency called high frequency. They bounce it off the upper atmosphere called the ionosphere, and it bounces back to Earth. It's almost like shining a flashlight to a mirror, and it comes back down. It could be 1,000 miles or 5,000 miles. We can't predict sometimes where it lands. And that's what we call propagation. So that's one of the things we use, but we use a lot of other input. Some of this is automated. These are people who have their own automated weather stations, and they send it through an amateur radio system that beacons every 15 minutes, and it comes out on our computers. We have nets, which are extremely important, and we have the Hurricane Watch Net manager here, and Rob is going to speak about the VoIP Hurricane Net, which is a hybrid net using internet and radio all integrated. And then we have, that's the Hurricane Watch Net. This is the other nets. We have Caribbean nets too. And I'll tell you one time when we had to talk to the Cuban Civil Defense Net, I had federal permission, okay. And you know, we have automated VHF, UHF, and some of the stuff we have there. In Florida, we have a very sophisticated system that hooks up about 27 VHF and UHF repeaters from Key West all the way further south, and they're all linked together all the way to the capital, Tallahassee, for all the EOCs. So they can lose all their own communications and satellite and all that, but the hams can still pass on the message. And then WinLink, which is, people don't understand that, but we can send emails using a radio. And you hook up your laptop or whatever, and it translates it using a device called a modulator, demodulator into tones. The tones go over the atmosphere into the ionosphere, come down, and there's a receiver that converts them back to digital. Then on our end, we get an email that prints out. It's amazing, and it's all done over radio, no wires in between. And I'll tell you about some of the other nets that we have there. And we're on many frequencies, and I always tell them we can't be everywhere at the same time. We only have a maximum of 4 positions open. We usually run 2. And this is all on our website if you need some of this information, but mainly we're on the Hurricane Watch Net and then also on the Echolink net. And Echolink is both digital and radio. And they connect into many different types of modes that they can use. And sometimes we get it all. Bobby Graves will talk about the Hurricane Watch Net. And the Hurricane Watch Net it's all HF, and they connect almost any country you want all together. And we don't have to be controlling the net, they control the net. We're basically the mailman that receives the message and transfers it. And then the VoIP net, oops, I hit the wrong button. The VoIP net is one where it goes from a radio through a receiver, through a computer, to another computer, and then back out. You know, and that is something that you say, well, that could, you know, if they lose internet, they can stop everything, right? Well, it's helped the other way around. When propagation was out on 20 meters and we had a station in an island, I'll show you that example in a minute. It came through. And we have other networks like the Citizens Weather Observers Program. These are not ham radio operators, but they have weather stations they hook up to the internet, and it beacons to a site sponsored by the NWS called the Mesonet. And we go there and we can watch live on maps. The only problem is, and we watched it as hurricanes passed through the middle of Florida, you see all the anemometers and the wind vanes and all varying as the wind comes up, and all of a sudden they disappear. Then you know they got hit pretty bad when that happens. So are the surface reports important? Yes, they are. And you can see this young man here having a little hard time trying to get a wind speed. We don't recommend that, okay? This is the weather report that amateur operators and amateur weather enthusiasts can submit online. And it has all the specific data, and it has a specific format which the hurricane forecasters are used to, so they don't have to waste time trying to find things. And that, when you fill it out, it's printed at our station online. We do review it, and then we actually take it to the Hurricane Center's main area. We're right across the hallway from them. And that way, if they see something surprising, they can come back and say, get a hold of this guy and ask him this and that. You know, is that 100-mile-per-hour wind real or estimated? You know, that type of thing. And this is what we use in the station, because a lot of the HF high-frequency modes, they're verbal, and they're going to read their weather station data, and we want to make sure we use it, number one, as a checklist, make sure we get it. Things like, you know, the wind, not the wind speed is precise, but the wind direction. I'll show you an example of how that was more important than wind speed. And then any other observations, you know. The bridge collapsed in Bermuda. We got that first. And there's another one there, and this one here was sent through a system called D-Star, and I don't know if you know D-Star. It's kind of a digital VHF radio system. But the nice thing is we can't have all that equipment there. We'd have to have an entire room. So we have, you know, people like, there was one person, John Davis, WB4QDX, who received all of that data, and it's printed out exactly like you see it here, and they used our format. And then we can print that and submit that. And then there's the other one, which is WindLink, the WL2K, which has to be there. And this is basically email over radio. You don't have to have a computer hooked up to an internet or anything like that. They have a special converter called a modulator, demodulator. You can correct me with that. That's old-fashioned stuff. But anyway, and they submitted, the thing about that, it's almost like an email. And they sent us pictures, which hurricane forecasters, when they see pictures like this, they're really amazed. you know, that they were able to do that, but all their internet and electricity was out. So can ham radio make a difference? Is ham radio too old? Our surface report's really important. And this is the director of the Hurricane Center, Mike Brennan, and basically, you know, he supports us very much, as all the directors that I have served under, which are now 12. At the beginning, some of them were skeptical. You know, you guys are occupying a lot of space. You got all this stuff on the roof and all that, until they get the first few surface reports. And then they realize. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of history, and I just want to make sure I'm on time. I got to go fast. This was Hurricane Allen, our first hurricane. It lasted 6 weeks. I was still in school, so me and 2 other ham radio operators would spend like 8 hours a day at the Hurricane Center. And it was a major hurricane, hit St. Lucia. A quick story, I was there on the radio, and the radio operator from St. Lucia, his name was Victor, J69DJ, basically said the hurricane went through yesterday, and now we have a lot of injured people, and we need emergency services, we need, you know, medical help. And I'm 22 years old, okay, in school, and I'm like, what the heck can I do? I can't call 911, you know. And just by coincidence, a British hospital ship called the HMS Glasgow was 1 day sail away from them. He got on our frequency, a ham radio frequency. Here's a hospital ship, and he says but we can't land because St. Lucia got independence from Great Britain, and we need permission from St. Lucia, not from Great Britain. And I was like, you know, I can maybe call somebody, and this ham operator in St. Lucia says, I'll get you the Prime Minister in 10 minutes. I was like, really? In 10 minutes, the Prime Minister was on the air, and they did, over ham radio, permission to allow that hospital ship to land and take over 100 patients on board. So that's just one of the interesting things that we did. We didn't design it, we didn't know it was going to happen, but it happened, and we were there. And then later on, the same hurricane went through the Gulf of America and hit Brownsville, Texas. And Brownsville lost all communications with all the NWS headquarters and with the Hurricane Center and all that. But they had a ham radio operator in the office who strung up a wire antenna and was able to talk back to us. And the director, Dr. Neil Frank, sat on the radio that night for hours with them. And of course, Hurricane Andrew, and I lived through that. I lost half the roof of my house, and the Hurricane Center was damaged heavily, and it's what we call our big one. And you can see some of the damages that were done were just incredible. And we had over 200 ham radio operators there operating day and night at the emergency operations centers, not only for the county, but some of the cities and all that. And mainly because, believe it or not, the military, when they got down there, could not communicate to the fire department or the police department or anything, because they had different radio systems. So we had all these ham operators in different ships, and our EOC was trying to collect everything together, and we even had hams and helicopters trying to coordinate and all that. So we became the missing link over there. And Hurricane Andrew, at first they thought it would only reach like a Cat 4. They were collecting wind speed reports from all over the place. And they collected a wind report from Turkey Point Nuclear Plant before the anemometer blew off of 214 miles per hour. Okay, that's definitely a Cat 5. So the joke is that the official wind speed was kapow. And I'll tell you a little story, because this little guy here happened to be an architect, and in 1992 worked for an architect who we did most of the work for the big power plants and stuff like that. And I was the one assigned to Turkey Point Nuclear Plant. And the weirdest thing I've seen was when I got there, you know, they had these 100-foot aluminum poles for their streetlights in their parking lot before you got into some of the main buildings. Half of them had bent or fallen north, and the other half fell south. And we were like, how can that happen? Well, the first level of the eye, the first wall of the eye came from the ocean side, bent them all facing one way. The strong ones kind of stayed up. The backside was even stronger, and it bent the other ones there. It was very interesting. Working there, I can't give you much information because I'm under federal surveillance, not to talk about the nuclear plant, but it was extremely interesting to see the types of damages they had. However, the nuclear plant proper building didn't suffer any damages, but some of the other ones were severely damaged, and we had to repair those. And then this was another interesting, I'll go real fast, this is Hurricane George, and, whoops, hit the wrong button. Hurricane George, real quick, was coming off the coast of Haiti, right in the middle there. At night, the eye was clouded over. The Cuban government would not allow our hurricane hunters in because of the airspace, et cetera. And they were estimating what the track would be, and they had it going over Guantanamo Bay, south, and the Cuban, all that. And I was on duty that night, and a hurricane director you may know called Max Mayfield, which is a great person, a good friend, came up and he says, do you talk to Cuba? I said, yeah, if they're on, we'll talk to Cuba. He says, we need you to get a Cuban at the eastern part of Cuba right now. And I was like, what? It's not like dialing a telephone. I can't just say I want to, you know. And I found the Cuban Civil Defense Net had someone in there from eastern Cuba, but Americans can't transmit on that frequency. And he says, I'm a federal officer and I need you to do this. And I called the head of the FCC back then, and I told him what was happening. And he says, we can't change the rules, but we'll be listening on a different frequency this night. I got on there, introduced ourselves at the National Hurricane Center that we needed vital information of this hurricane because it was becoming a major hurricane and we could not see where the center of circulation was. And this ham came on from a little city called Punto Este in the most eastern point of Cuba. And he's screaming over his microphone. He said he's standing on his chair because the floodwaters in his house had come up, you know, almost to his knees, and he's afraid of getting electrocuted. And he was screaming the wind speeds he was getting, you know, 80, 90 kilometers per hour. And Max and this other Lixian Avila, the only other Cuban meteorologist, hurricane specialist that was there. He's very excitable. He came in, he says, I don't care what the speed is, I want the direction. Here again, you know, I'm not a meteorologist. I said, so I asked the guy, I said, can you give me the direction? And the last three words that the guy screamed over the air was, del sur, del sur, del sur, and then all of a sudden he's gone. And Lixian got all excited, ran out of the room, Max ran out of the room. I didn't think anything of it. I went home, 11 o'clock news, I'm watching, and I see Max go in there with our report in his hand, and I go like, holy crap, I hope he didn't do something wrong. And he says, well, because of the ham radio reports we received, we have changed the track of the hurricane. It's going through the north side of Cuba, not the south side. That's what happened. So, you know, here again, some guy who is not a meteorologist over there, I'm not a meteorologist, we didn't know what we were doing, but they did. And those little reports, just one report, made a difference. And this was one, Hurricane Michelle in 2001, was going through the middle, was going through the Isle of Youth and the middle of Cuba. And, you know, hurricanes have no borders. Okay, and that, one of my mottos is, ham radio has no borders. We get on the air, we talk to anybody. We don't ask their beliefs, we don't ask their politics. You have a surface report, you have a wind report, we'll take it and we'll give you our information for you to use. And this one was coming through there, through the middle of Cuba and the Isle of Youth, which is what you see there, all flooded, that little island off the southern coast. And this young man comes on from Cuba, and he was in the military. And he was giving us the radar coordinates of the eye of the hurricane. I was like, oh my God. I took him. I said, he'll probably be in jail for 20 years. They actually made him a hero down there. And then later on, a different hurricane came through and was going through the Bahamas, and the yacht that was docked there in the Bahamas was giving us wind reports, and the satellite shots had shown the eye opening up on the southern end, which means it's losing power, and the Bahamas were lowering the hurricane warnings. And I submitted some of those reports, and Max Mayfield came back in and he said, where are you getting this? It's supposed to be diminishing in strength. And he spoke directly with the sailboat operator and got all the reports from him. And then Max called the Met Office in the Bahamas and says, keep your hurricane warnings up. Visibly, we don't see the circulation, but the mass of wind, which, you know, I know a little bit about physics and structures and stuff, but I didn't know that invisible wind still has a mass that can continue to rotate, even though you don't see it from a satellite. He clocked, and he had, I think it was Rayathon weather equipment on his sailboat, and he was docked, and that's good equipment, and he had clocked winds of 110 miles per hour. So those are the things that we do, and sometimes we even make the official hurricane reports, and you see them highlighted on the bottom there from Stacy Stewart. And Stacy retired a couple years ago, and he had served in the, I think in the Navy for, was it 3 or 4 tours and all that, but he was a meteorologist. Excellent person. And here I'm going to touch a little bit about this hurricane here, which happened in August of 2005. And we were tracking it carefully all the way when it started in the Caribbean, south of the Bahamas. And I'll never forget that night that I was sitting there, and it was just a mess of thunderstorms until it hit the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream waters are very hot, and it bloomed. And this was Hurricane Katrina. And it was at night, it turned, and all of a sudden it went right over the hurricane center. And it was the first hurricane to ever go directly over the hurricane center as a Cat 1. So we had no damages, but a lot of the people that wanted to be in a hurricane, we went outside to look up at the stars when the wind, we couldn't help it. Of course, there was a news person with us, and we told him, if you publish this, you'll never be back. But then it went to a Cat 5 in the middle of the Gulf, and fortunately it diminished to a Cat 3 when it hit the bayou, the area between Slidell and New Orleans. And we were getting reports, you know, over 125 mile per hour reports. And then we got all the flooding reports, and that was what was astounding when we got reports of part of the roof of the Superdome blowing off. And we had not had those reports in the FEMA office where we sit. is right across from us. We got the FEMA office there with the direct liaison to the White House. And then we have the main hurricane room, and then there's other specialties like TAFB and the NWS on the other side. And they had come in and said, you know, they had not received that report yet. And then we were talking about the flooding reports, and we had, you know, even people in boats, in tugboats in the Mississippi, telling us some of the things that they saw. So it made a big difference. And this is basically in the media room looking at the main Hurricane Center, Operations Center there. There you have 4 people who were directors of the Hurricane Center, the main director, and future directors of the Hurricane Center, all working on there. And the person on the phone there, he's on the phone with the White House. So we got this from the NWS headquarters. They said they lost all comms with NWS Slidell and the St. Charles area. And then we started trying to find somebody, and in Slidell, NWS, happened to be a ham radio operator. And his name was Sean, and he came on and he gave some of the reports, and they were very high. I think 120 knots was some of the reports we got. And they had, you know, and he says, we have 41 people in here. We want to make sure their families know that they're safe, but we can't get out of the building. All the trees fell. So here's just a few, this is just a few of the operators that were on duty, operating during Katrina. And here's a little, I think it's gonna start. This is actual audio report during a real transmission while we were communicating between Slidell, St. Charles, and NWS headquarters, because they had no other way to communicate with them. And you'll see our operators repeating the wind reports and all that. And then later, we stayed on for 6 hours with them. So this operator, his name is Ken Reed. He's on the phone with NWS headquarters, and he's on a microphone on his head on the radio at the same time.
I'll get that.
Okay, overall peak 120 knots. Okay, NHC, yes, that's current millibars 945 and current peak 90 knots.
Then we had one of the hurricane forecasters come in.
Knots.
He didn't believe the wind speeds, so he would verify
Roger that.
it
Can we have a
himself.
time for the peak, please?
Okay, very good.
Okay, it's 90 knots now, 945 millibars now, with a peak of 120 knots. Did you get
This
that
is
part?
Dr. Jim Hirschman down
90
there.
knot peak, over.
He was one of our first operators.
Okay, very good. 5 minutes ago,
When we first started
5 minutes
here.
ago, Ken, over.
He passed away a few years ago.
Roger the 5 minutes ago.
Okay,
so
he was
Charlie,
the head of
are you
Mercy
catching this?
Hospital cardiology. And he was one of the best cardiologists that were in Florida. He's a ham operator.
Sounds very reasonable.
And he volunteered
the values we
his
had were very
time
rounded. Are these
to
kind of
do all
approximate
this.
values, or were those
And
the
then we
exact
had-
measured values?
then we
We had
had
90
a,
knots gusting to
An
120 knots. Over.
NBC reporter came in and questioned us. He said, you guys were a bunch of dinosaurs.
Okay, do
You've
either
been
of you
around
have
for 100
anything
years.
more
What-
before we
what
close
can you
this circuit?
contribute to this? So I had told Rick Knabb was one of our former Hurricane Center directors, and that's Mike Bettis there from the Weather Channel.
So he says, let me interview you to let him know you're not a dinosaur.
Telephone
Okay.
lines, cell tower. Sometimes going old school is the only way to get out the message. And sometimes those messages come straight from the National Hurricane Center, where they have their own radio team. And Julio Ripoll joins us right now. Julio, thanks for being with us. You know, this is a unique setup, a unique relationship that amateur radio operators have with the Hurricane Center. Tell us how it works.
Well, thank you, Mike. Basically, what we do here is we talk to other ham radio operators that are being affected by hurricanes, sometimes right in the middle of a hurricane. We use radios here, different types of radios. Some of them are international radios, like we used to call them shortwave at one time. We bounce our signal off the ionosphere, and it lands thousands of miles away, just using enough power to power a light bulb, believe it or not. And then we gather eyewitness reports from these ham operators in the islands or on the Gulf Coast, anywhere, and then we bring them in and give them to the hurricane forecasters. And sometimes that fills in those gaps that they can't get through satellites and air reconnaissance.
So Julio, hey, it's Dr. Rick Knapp. It's good to see you. Now, Julio and I go way back, okay? But
Way back.
And I want everybody to understand where you're sitting, okay? You are right next to the Hurricane Reconnaissance Office and directly across the hallway from where the hurricane specialists sit. So I've had the experience of grabbing from you a piece of paper that has a ham radio report of an observation from an area that's been affected by the hurricane. We couldn't have got that observation any other way. Talk about how you work with the specialists down there.
Yeah, basically that's what we do. Just one example, which you know very well, in 2005 Hurricane Adrian, we had a sailboat out near El Salvador. And that sailboat was sending us weather reports from their weather station on the sailboat there. And there was no other surface data coming in at that time. And we would basically write all that down, and sometimes we print it out if they're digital, because we do have digital radios as well. And we bring them into the Hurricane Center with all the forecasters there, and all the hurricane specialists look at it, and then they can tell, you know, where that wind, what direction the wind was coming in, the barometric pressure, and that fills in those gaps.
Yeah, and Julio was telling the story that that was from when I had to do the report on that system, and the only way I was able to actually accurately document what happened with that system in Central America was because of data through the ham radio operators that relayed it. Now, talk about all the volunteers and the effort that you go through to train everybody and recruit those volunteers.
Yeah, we have a staff of about 30 volunteers. They're all top-grade ham radio operators, and we do bring them in and interview them. They have to have, you know, background checks and personal references. And then we bring them in, and we take about 2 or 3 days of a training session, which is not radio related because they know their radios before they come in. But basically how to gather the data, how to bring it down, how to filter some of the data, and then how to interact with the hurricane specialist.
Julio, are there gaps that you'd like to fill, places where you maybe would like to have a little bit better coverage than you have now?
Oh, absolutely. We've had some missing pieces, especially in the islands. We have good relationship with the ham radio operators in the island and some of their clubs. But what happens very often, like what happens here in Miami, people batten down the hatches, bring down their towers, and then we don't hear from them. So we ask the ham operators in the hurricane-affected areas to have backup power, whether it's battery or a generator, and to use wire antennas, because when we use those aluminum beam antennas that are excellent when we're doing regular operating, the wire antennas are very flexible, they flex in the wind, and they don't break. And we've had, in fact, here at the Hurricane Center, we have 7 ham radio antennas up there. And the 2 main ones we use, we call dipole antennas. They're actually wires. They're about 140 feet long from our 100-foot tower down to the building. And those withstood hurricanes like Wilma a few years ago, where we had winds here. I think they were up to about 110 miles per hour, gusting up there. And they lasted easily because the wind goes right through it. They flex. And with those wires, we can talk all over the world.
Yeah, so Julio, I was on the operations floor during Hurricane Wilma, and I remember that event very well, and I've told the story many times. Yes, the Hurricane Center's facility is a steel reinforced concrete bunker, but communications are vulnerable. But how is it that the ham radio signal is going to be the one that might be the last one operating, even at the Hurricane Center if they're directly hit.
Yeah, that happened during Hurricane Fabian in Bermuda many years ago. They had no communications left over, conventional communications. And I remember a very famous reporter came in here, he heard us talking to Bermuda, and he asked us how we're doing that. And I explained to him how we're bouncing the signals through the ionosphere. There's no wires connected between us and them. We send the signal up, like a mirror, it bounces it back down to Earth. And he says, but this is 100-year-old technology. You guys are dinosaurs. I said, okay, fine. I said, when you're in Bermuda in a hurricane, go outside with your satellite phone and call me. And of course, then he realized, well, I really can't do that. I said, well, these hams can.
Great story.
That is awesome. Hey, you might be a dinosaur, but you're not extinct. Hey, Julio, thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe a lot of people just don't know. Listen, this is, the ionosphere helping us communicate.
Such dedicated volunteers.
So that's the thing. We're dinosaurs, but we're still not extinct. I just got a couple more slides to go, and just to want to let you know, and I'm a very sentimental person, and I like to see what happens and how we help people. And it affects me when I receive pictures like this of the people that we try to help, during hurricanes. And these are all the directors I have served under. And you can see there that I used to have a black mustache and I used to have a lot more hair. Okay. So I started very young. And that's when Dr. Neil Frank said, bring me that kid from the UM. And I grew up at the Hurricane Center, even though my career is completely different. I designed medical facilities. So I want to thank everybody, but I'm going to announce that I'm going to be retiring this year. I have to, do something else. I'm retiring also from work, and maybe do a little traveling. But I'm not going to just turn the light switch off and leave the Hurricane Center hanging there. So I have a new person coming in. His name is Lloyd Kurtzman. He's a retired fire chief battalion captain. He's the chief and paramedic, and he also does paramedic instructions. He had retired, but somehow he went back, and now they got him part-time doing paramedic training. And there he is operating at WX4NHC, and he said he would fulfill that position. And so now we're going to go through about a year-long interface and with the staff as well. So thank you all for your patience and listening to our presentation. And now we're going to have Bobby Graves from the Hurricane Watch Net. You want to take a break first? Yeah, we got started late. Okay, we can take a break now if you like, and then after that, Bobby can start on his presentation on the Hurricane Watch Net. Okay? Thank you.
Big picture science. It's radio. Talk about radio. We're also dinosaurs. We're public radio show.
Oh, is it? I mean, so you're hand too?
No, I'm public radio.
This little wonky talkie and you're so good to go.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome here to New Orleans for this year's National Hurricane Conference. I'm Bobby Graves. My ham radio call sign is KB5HAV. I'm the net manager for the Hurricane Watch Net. Been with the net since 2000. Ever since that time, I was back in those days. Our website was actually, when I joined, it was in the development stages. And the gentleman that brought me on board learned that I had a background with websites, and he basically handed the website over to me to finish developing, and it's been updated a number of times over the years. From 02 to 06, I served as assistant net manager. At the end of the 06 season, I stepped away for a short time as I was still recovering from side effects from rare form of spinal cord cancer and a few other life events. Rejoined the net back in 2012 and quickly resumed doing the website. And in the following year, I was offered the chance to serve as net manager, and it's been a pleasure to fill that role ever since. This is a big season for the Hurricane Watch Net. This is our 60th anniversary, and in preparations for this 60th anniversary, we're planning for a special on-air special event on the first weekend in June, June 7th and June 8th. We'll be operating on our 20 meter and 40 meter frequencies. But for those that check in with us, when you check in, they'll give you a website to go to, and or either email address to go to, which in this case I'll tell you now will be WX5HWN@hwn.org. And from there, we'll confirm your call sign when you've checked in with us, and I'll create you a specialized certificate to have your call sign on it, and just a nice commemorative photo where you can put on your wall. The Hurricane Watch Net officially began on Labor Day weekend of 1965 by this gentleman here, Jerry Murphy, K8YUW. Back in 1965, he was a very young man, only 28 years old, and he was stationed in Rhode Island while he was in the Navy. And in his off time, he loved to get on ham radio and do what he could. Back in that day, he was operating on a net called the Intercontinental Amateur Radio Traffic Net. Back in those days, that operated on 14320. That net is still operational today on 14300. They're just not quite the same organization they used to be. Back then, they used to do a ton of traffic handling. You got to remember, that was back in the early stages of the Vietnam War, and they did a lot of phone patch traffic for our military wherever they were in the world. So he was doing, Jerry was doing what he could. Well, come Labor Day weekend, there was a lot of questioning going on about this storm named Betsy trying to come through the Bahamas. And it was so much of a, I don't want to say a disruption to the net, but instead of them being able to be a traffic net as normal, there's just a lot of people want to know, what's this storm Betsy doing? Because, you know, we did not have the technology back then like we do now. And so Jerry asked the net manager if he minded moving everybody up to 14325, those interested in the storm. Manager thought, that's a great idea. So he moved up to 14325. There was a lady by the name of Marcy, was located in the Panama area. She followed him up, and they started trying to do what they could to help those asking about Betsy. To help out, there was a gentleman in the Miami area. I wish I had his name. Anyway, he would get the latest bulletins relayed to Jerry, and they would relay that out to the people asking about the storm. Jerry got to thinking, maybe the forecaster could use some weather data. Some of these folks are mariners, some are on the islands, the Bahamas. So he started gathering weather data and tried to get into the Hurricane Center. Well, back then, it's 1965, we didn't have a ham radio station there, so we had to somebody either call or send it in via fax. The Hurricane Center said, please, we don't have any information like this. Anything you give us, please do so. So over the next, over the course of this storm, Betsy came through the Bahamas, went across the southern tip of Florida, and later on ended up in this area of the country, right here in New Orleans. The resulting damage from that one storm alone was the first time a hurricane caused $1 billion worth of damage, earning it the name Billion Dollar Betsy. We quickly formed a direct working relationship with the National Hurricane Center. When I got my chance to make my first trip to the National Hurricane Conference back in 2014, I discovered, hey, there's a Canadian Hurricane Center. I said, I'm not leaving here till we get to meet one another and see what we can do to help one another out, because Canada does get hit from time to time with tropical cyclones, usually whether it's a tropical storm. Sometimes they're just a post-tropical cyclone by they get there, but there are times they get on up there and they're still a strong hurricane. But for 2014, we didn't realize it was going to be going to work so fast, because we had a storm that come through, hit the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and a few days later, it's sitting on the back doorstep of the Canadian Hurricane Center. And we've had a chance to work a number of storms over the past 10 years for storms going in the Canadian Maritimes. We've also been active for basically all the Atlantic Basin hurricanes since our inception back in Labor Day of '65. Just a little bit of history. I took some time during the winter months to see just how many storms have developed during the lifetime of the Hurricane Watch Net. Would you believe there have been a total of 777 named storms? And I'm going to get my glasses on, I can't see this. But 385 of those became a hurricane, 150 of those became a major hurricane. We activated 170 times for 156 hurricanes. 60 of those were major hurricanes. There were some that they were forecast to become a hurricane, they just never did do so when they made landfall. And there's been a total of 26 Category 5 hurricanes since '65. 12 of those made landfall, and 3 of those unfortunately made landfall here in the United States. The last one being Michael back in 2018. Back in 2016, we set an all-time activation record for our net. We were in continuous operation around the clock for just over 6 days. And we amassed over 1,300 man hours for Hurricane Matthew. That storm, if you remember, hit Haiti, eastern side of Cuba, then went across, came up the Florida coastline, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina before it turned out to sea. And the reason we were able to be in continuous operation is prior to me becoming net manager in 2013, we were basically a 20-meter only net. We operated strictly on 14.325. Back when I was even assistant manager, I didn't like that idea because storms are like babies. They don't care about the time. When a baby wants to be born, baby's going to be born, right? Same way with a hurricane. When it gets ready to come ashore, it's going to come on shore. You may want to come on shore during the daytime when you're operating on 20, but no, it may want to come on shore at 4 a.m. in the morning. So we need to have people on the air to help out. So that's the first thing I did when I became manager. Didn't realize how busy we would be. We ended up being, in the past 10 years, well, since 2013, we'd have to activate for any storms that year. But since we've been busy, and I'll hit that in just a moment. But during that time, in the 2010s, if you want to call it that, for the 20-meter band, we were in the bottom end of a solar cycle. The propagation on the 20-meter band was basically nothing. Normally, like it is now, when the sun comes up, you can hear things on 20 meters. In the evening, once the sun goes down, 8, 9, 10, maybe sometimes nighttime, 11 o'clock at night, you're still hearing people on the air. Back in the 2010s, when it got to an hour before sunset, 20's off the air. I mean, you can't hear nothing. So we kept operating on, we basically was operating 40 around the clock. And I dare say that change probably helped save our organization. I don't think we'd be around anymore if we just was strictly a 20-meter only net. The mission of our net is to disseminate advisory information. Now, a lot of folks will say, well, Bobby, you got to remember, we're in the 21st century now. We got 24-hour news and weather. We got all other kind of technology. That's all fine and dandy. But tell that to the people of Haiti. Right before Hurricane Matthew hit Haiti in 2016, there's 3 hams I know of that live there, and I've sent them an email to all 3 of them. In less than 5 minutes, I had a phone call from John Rivera, HH2JR from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. He's crying. He said, Bobby, I just want to thank you for loving on us. He said, we didn't know there was a hurricane out there, much less a Category 5 coming toward our way. He said, but thanks to you, we've alerted our emergency network for ham radio here in the country. And he said, what we can do? I said, 1, stay safe. Any information you can get us on the storm, we appreciate that, and we'll keep you informed on what the storm is doing. And we got a lot of great information, and actually received a few videos he was able to collect from his friends, and he sent to me, and I sent to Julio and others there at the National Hurricane Center, and it seemed to work out quite well. Not only do we read the latest information, we also grab the weather information from those in the field. Now, people might once again say, well, we got all this newer technology. Why don't we use that instead of ground truth with data? Well, consider, you got the stationary satellites that give us fantastic information. Over the past almost 10 years, I guess now, we've had GO-16. Gives great information, high definition video or high definition images. Can update every 30 seconds if they needed to. I'm anxious to see how this new GO-19 that just replaced GO-16 on how well it's going to do. But you got to consider that satellite is in a stationary orbit about 200 plus miles above the surface, trying to give the forecasters an idea of what's going on at the surface. We have the hurricane hunters that fly into, around, and above the hurricanes, dropping drop signs and taking other kind of information, try to figure out what's going on at the surface. We got Doppler radar on the ground, scanning the skies, trying to figure out what's going on in the storm, but what's happening at the surface. Well, if we have people at the surface that's got a weather station, or at least a barometer, or can tell us which way the wind is blowing, I can promise you that forecaster, he wants that information. We also function as a backup communications link, not only for the hurricane centers, but the coastal area weather service field offices, emergency operations centers, storm shelters, non-governmental agencies, and sometimes even the military. And we try to be there before, during, and after a hurricane event. A lot of folks think, well, Bobby, you're not really being there after. So I've caught that word, and I've been trying to, over the past couple of years, for those major hurricanes that are hitting, we stay in an operation once the storm has been downgraded to a tropical storm to not only grab post-storm information as far as damage reports, but also to help out with any outgoing health and welfare traffic. And over the past couple of seasons, there's been a lot of folks asking for it, and we're going to keep doing what we can. We also provide situational awareness to government and non-government agencies that request such, and also work closely with the Salvation Army SATERN network with outgoing health and welfare traffic. Here's interesting stats, or at least I found interesting. Just looking at this millennium alone, going from the first decade, 2000 to 2009, we've had a total of 32 landfalling hurricanes. That's a lot. And you got to consider 2 of those years there were no landfalling hurricanes in 06 and 09. The next decade, 2010 to 2019, we've had 27 landfalling hurricanes. Would have been more if there had been something in 2013. This part's going to scare you to death. Just this decade alone, the first 5 years, we've had almost as many landfalling hurricanes as we did the first decade. 31 landfalling hurricanes. At the rate we're on, we're going to set an all-time record on landfalling hurricanes when this decade's over. Last year, we were busy. 8 landfalling hurricanes, some monsters. Hate what Helene did and what Burl did, and anybody who was caught in any of these storms. One hurricane is bad enough, but we had some tough ones this past year. For our team, we amassed over 2,000 hours of man-hour, 2,000 man-hours of labor. Let's have a little bit of fun here. Haven't done this one in a long time. On my Zoom, I do Zoom presentations from time to time, and I'd like to put this in. Since 1965, back then, the average cost of the average home was $13,600. Cost of your family sedan, $2,650. or my favorite car, the '65 Mustang Fastback, $2,400. Gas back then was only 31 cents a gallon. Cars had to have 2 keys to use them. The square key was always for the ignition, the round one was for the doors and the glove box and the trunk. You get a Hershey bar for a nickel. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't even have push button phones. We had rotary phones. Some people didn't even have them. You had what was called a party line. If you don't know what a party line is, ask me after this. Also, to help you find out the phone numbers, we had the yellow pages. The white pages were local residents. The businesses were always in the yellow section. We did have portable computers, if you want to call it that. Digital Equipment Corporation had introduced the PDP-8. Only had 4K of RAM, about the size of a little refrigerator like you find in a hotel room, and it cost $18,000. Back then, that's $180,000 now. We didn't have the widescreen, high-definition color TVs like we got today. Most people had the little 13-inch black and white analog TV. Some reason putting tinfoil on the rabbit ear seemed to help reception. And to keep up what was going on that week on TV, we had the TV guide. Where I lived at, we only had 2 TV stations, and they were only on the air from 6 a.m. until midnight. That's way before 24-hour news and weather got to be thought about. Could you imagine what the TV guide would look like if we could have all the 24-hour stuff we got now and the 50 million stations available now? It'd be thick. As mentioned, we've got used and spoiled to the high-definition satellite imageries we've been able to use over the past 20 years or so. But back in 1965, we didn't have any stationary satellites. We had one that just orbited the Earth, take a picture here every now and then. This is our inaugural storm, Hurricane Betsy. Can you tell me where it's located at? Forecasters knew where it was. We didn't get the first stationary satellite until 1975. That's when GOES 2 went into operation for the Atlantic. GOES 1 was in operation for the Indian Ocean. We all love the Doppler radar that come along in the early 90s. Gives us a lot of great information. Can tell you not only how much the rainfall is or how strong the wind speeds are. The only problem is everything went, by the time it displays on the screen for you, that information is at least 5 to sometimes 10 minutes old. A lot can happen in that amount of time. But back in '65, the radar we had was originally designed to spot aircraft back in World War II. It just did a better job of picking up weather. And that's a shot of Hurricane Betsy making landfall back in 1965. Julio, I want you to come up here for me a second, buddy. This gentleman here answered the call of duty when Dr. Neil Frank called over to get the, have somebody bring over a ham station set up to see how it would work. That helped the Hurricane Watch Net out a bunch because we no longer had to pick up the phone and call in information or send a fax in. Julio went to work after saying no, they won't have a ham station there all the time. He was able to get the call sign W4EHW, and since '04 we know have been using WX4NHC. I know you're retiring this year, buddy, but on behalf of the Hurricane Watch Net, I want to just take a moment to honor you. Thank you for answering that call that Neil Frank called upon you back then. You've been a great ambassador for ham radio, not only for the weather, but your humanitarian work that you did with the earthquake in Haiti back in 2010. And just, man, you're just an overall great friend. I appreciate you.
Great friend, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. And for those that can't see, that's a copy of the certificate there. So what has changed for the Hurricane Watch Net? Well, in 2000, we entered the digital age of having not only our website, but also we have a chat room that we use to coordinate between our members and also the National Hurricane Center. All of us, we can talk to Julio or any of his members there when operating. Maybe times, hey, one of the forecasters say, hey, we need some more information. If Julio can't do it or one of the others, hey, we sometimes talk directly with the forecasters. It's rare, but it has happened. And back in 2017, we started using our own logging program to help us out in more ways than one. And of course, since 2000, we've also had a tropical weather email subscription you can sign up for. You can get one for the Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, and Central Pacific. It only is active during hurricane season. As soon as the tropical weather outlook is published or any active storm is going on, within just milliseconds of the forecaster hitting their send button on their keyboard, you'll have a copy of that report in your email inbox. Free service of the Hurricane Watch Net. Hurricane Center tried that for a few years. They shut it down in 2012, so I think right now we're still the only ones offering that free service there. What else has changed for the Hurricane Watch Net? Availability. As mentioned before, we were strictly, for many years, strictly a 20-meter only net, but I changed that in 2013, making us a round-the-clock net. And as old saying goes, I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, we always have a need for hurricane preparedness as well as amateur radio operators. Our net activation policy is whenever a hurricane is within 300 miles of expected landfall. However, that could vary due to the forward speed and intensity of that storm. If it's moving real slow, say like 5 miles per hour, we may delay a little bit. But if it's say like moving at 15 miles per hour, and hey, this is a major hurricane, yeah, we'll be activating in that 300-mile area. It's just sort of a guideline for where we start at. And of course, our frequencies of operation, 14,325 by day, 7.268 by night. When required, we'll operate both frequencies at the same time. Our area of coverage is the entire Caribbean, Central America, Eastern Mexico, Eastern Canada, and the Eastern Gulf Coast states of the United States. And from time to time, we even activate for storms in the Eastern Pacific. From time to time, I get asked, well, where are y'all located at, Bobby? Well, unlike most organizations, that does have a central hub. To better serve our served agency, which being the National Hurricane Center, we're scattered about. We cover 6 countries and 22 U.S. states. The other countries are, besides the United States, is Canada, Bermuda, Honduras, Aruba, and Venezuela. And we do have a number of members who are fully bilingual. I'm still trying to add more bilingual operators to our membership to help out, because there are still a number of folks that check in with us. They're bilingual, they speak Spanish only, or they may be bilingual, they're just more comfortable speaking Spanish. So the more bilingual operators we have, the better. Prior to any net activation, we always try to alert as many of the daily users of 14.325 and 7268. We also alert the maritime networks of the Maritime Mobile Service Net, the Waterway Net, and that one in the top right called boatwatch.org. For many years it was known as International Boat Watch Net. That organization, using WinLink and other means, are able to reach literally hundreds of mariners in the Atlantic. Some are ham operators, some are commercial, but they can at least tune in and listen to what the latest information on the storm is. If they are ham operators, we do invite them to check in with us to give us their weather reports. I know the forecasters would love to get at least 3 hourly reports if possible. We also work closely with the Amateur Radio Relay League and the International Amateur Radio Union Region 2. Through their email networks, they're able to help us spread the word of our activations. We work very closely with U.S. Army and Air Force Mars, as well as Salvation Army SATERN Net. And when storms do affect the Canadian Maritimes, we contact their counterpart to the ARRL, which is Radio Amateurs of Canada, and their version of SKYWARN, which they call CanWarn. And also we have our presence on social media, which is on Facebook. As of last year, we're now on X, which is formerly known as Twitter. We do have a YouTube channel, and this year we're going, one way or another, I'm putting out some new information on there and see if we can't make that channel grow. We also contact numerous amateur radio news outlets, including Newsline and others. We always work very closely with the ham station of the Hurricane Center, WX4NHC, and also with our sister network, the VoIP Hurricane Net. They were actually started back in 2002, and in 2005, Rob Macedo took over as their Director of Operations. Rob, I wish you were here, buddy, because I've got a plaque here for you as well. And there's what it says there, mainly just for your recognizing your 20 years of service as being Director of Operations at the with the VoIP Net. I also know you do a lot of work with SKYWARN up there in Massachusetts. Does a lot of work with the Boston Marathon, along with Jim here with the camera work here today. And we just want to say thank you to for your service and all that you do. Real fine, Rod, man. We can't wait to see you again, buddy. We miss you. If you haven't noticed, we're passionate about what we do. So you may ask, well, why are you so passionate? I can tell you one thing for the Hurricane Watch Net. Over the past 60 years, we've witnessed the power and destruction of Mother Nature, and we're here to do what we can to help in assisting to saving lives. We've seen the power of what storm surge can do. This is what Ivan did back in 2004 after it hit Gulf Shores, Alabama, and the storm surge going through Escambia Bay just leveled the I-10 bridge between Pensacola, Florida and Milton, Florida. We've seen what storm surge can do in New Jersey and New York, as what happened with Superstorm Sandy. We've seen the power of not only storm surge, but Category 5 winds such as Camille in '69. Just leveling everything in sight. Same way with Andrew back in 1992 and Hurricane Michael back in 2018. And as we were reminded very strongly last year, hurricanes are not always a coastal event. Just because they made landfall doesn't mean it's over. Hurricane Camille back in '69 moved well inland into the state of Mississippi. When it got to Jackson, which is 150 miles inland, it's still a Category 1 hurricane. It eventually moved on up into Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia, bringing well-needed rain to areas that were hit hard by a drought. But when it got to West Virginia, the amount of rain it dropped, there was flooding there. Unfortunately, a lot of folks died in those floods. Hurricane Ivan, once again, just sort of picking on that one that I got many I could pick from out of 60 years of services. But Ivan was a strange one. After it made landfall in Gulf Shores, Alabama, over the next 3 days as it moved inland towards Pennsylvania, spawned up to 130 tornadoes before it finally got back out in the Atlantic, went south and crossed over the southern tip of Florida, and then eventually into southeast Texas. A lot of folks say, well, it's just a tropical storm, Bobby. It's just nothing but an over-glorified thunderstorm. Tell that to the people of Houston back in 2001. This is what Allison did when it stalled and dropped 40 inches of rain on the city. Left thousands homeless. It caused a lot of damage. 41 people died, and there was over, I can't see that number there. Yeah, $5.5 billion and 2001 of damage. So taking a look back 20 years after Hurricane Katrina, that's a night I will never forget when it first made landfall. Julio was talking about how when the storm made landfall there in Miami, I was actually talking to Julio that night. He said, you know, forecasters, they not believing this. They going outside to see this, you know, see the eye of the storm. And I can believe them doing that because there's a few times when I was working at the National Weather Service office in Jackson, Mississippi, there was a few times we were told there's a hurricane, a tornado coming straight toward the Weather Service. First thing those forecasters did, they went outside to see what they could see. If they couldn't see what there was a observation tower. They could get up on the top of the building and look out there as well. But, you know, that's something rare for them to see. And I don't blame them. You know, that's what they study to try to understand and how to predict on what these storms are doing. Get a better understanding of these things. I mean, it's one thing to see the data, but when you sometimes just see it with your own eye, it brings it closer to home, you know. But as this storm continued to generate and moving on out in the Gulf of Mexico, it made landfall on a Monday, but on that Saturday, I told my wife and my family, I said, you know, we need to start preparing for this storm. Everybody started laughing at me. Bobby, that thing's going to come back and hit the Big Bend like they keep saying it was going to do. I said, well, I'm going to do what I feel like I need to do. Back then, I mentioned earlier, I was still recovering from spinal cord cancer surgery. I was on a wheelchair, basically thought I never would walk again. Another story for another day, but praise the Lord, I'm able to walk. But when I was out, one of the things I wanted to do is not only get non-perishable foods, but also at this little cooler I found at a truck stop. Not much, but it's enough to put a 6-pack of Cokes or bottled water or put your meds in. Runs off 12 volts, does a great job. And I got a spool of wire. I also picked up 4-inch cooling fans. And the family said, why do you need that? I said, you'll see. And I also had this little black and white TV with radio and a flashlight in it. And I got all the wire stuff and it hooked up to one of the batteries on my power chair. My power chair had 2 big deep cell marine batteries. Well, the day Katrina made landfall on that Monday, at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we lost power. And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to be without power for a long time. My wife was saying, no, we don't want to be off for a couple of days. We were without power for 3 weeks. No power, no telephones, no cell phones for 2 weeks, no internet, no nothing. But I knew we weren't as hit as bad as what the coast got hit. And when I knew how bad things was the next morning when we finally, out of 4 stations in the Jackson area, we only had 1 station on the air, is when I learned how bad New Orleans got hit. And the first one I got to see, like I think like most people did, the Superdome. And then start seeing all the flooding in the cities when the levees broke. Just a sight it's just hard to fathom. And I know the city's still recovering 20 years later. But what a lot of folks didn't get to see is the damage that was caused on the Mississippi Gulf Coast due to the storm surge. I mean, yeah, the winds may not have been as bad, but I can tell you where I lived up in the Jackson, Mississippi area, we still had wind gusts over 130 miles per hour at times. But also had some family who lived towards the Mississippi-Alabama line, getting close to a town called Moss Point and Pascagoula. They lived well inland. They had 20 feet of storm surge at where they were at. Give you an idea how bad the storm surge was in Mobile. It broke the record. It was set back in 1979 when Hurricane Frederick went through. That's how bad Katrina was. But for any of us here on the coast, we already know how bad it was. During hurricane season, I always like to remind folks, please visit our website, hwn.org. Anytime there's an active storm, you'll find it at the top center of the page, whether it's in the Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, or Central Pacific. You also have the email subscriptions I was telling you about. We got a couple locations on the homepage, of course, on any page on the left side navigation bar, we have links for that. Also, our presence on social media. We also have some downloads you can get, such as hurricane tracking maps, family emergency plan, emergency supply kits, and more. Basically, some of the information we have in your handouts will also have downloadable from our website. Anytime there is an active storm, we've got a page that's dedicated to those storms, and you can go into how much detail you want to learn about those. Most people would want to use public advisories. That's one you'll hear usually on TV. Another good one to get is the discussion. One thing I love about the discussion product, that's where the forecaster gets a chance to lay down his thinking, his overall mentality, of his reasoning for that public advisory being as it is. And at the bottom of that discussion product, he will put in, or she will put in, key messages, things that may be of great importance about that storm. And for those who like to keep up with the tracking of the storm, they put in forecast points going out to 120 hours. When it comes to our net activations, we need reporting stations. We need you. When we do activate, what do we need? Well, in addition to your name and location, let us know if your information is measured or estimated. While we always love measured data, we will definitely take estimated. Such information we need is wind speed, wind gust, wind direction. If you do have a personal weather station, let us know the height and location of that anemometer. Is very important. If you do have a barometer, let us know the last time it was calibrated. No matter, we can always use it as a baseline of tracking the trend going up and down. Rainfall, how much rain over X amount of time. Able to safely do so, storm surge, or any other type of damage. If you happen to have a friend close by, ham or not, if they have a personal weather station, and maybe you don't, call them up, ask them what the information is so they can forward that info to the Hurricane Center. Maybe they are a ham, and if you do lose phone lines or whatever, maybe you can have a schedule set with them on UHF or VHF using a handheld or something. All that information goes a long ways. And if you don't know if you don't have a personal weather station and don't know how to judge wind speed, on any of our web pages, on the left side of the navigation bar, you'll find a link that's called Beaufort Wind Scale. Great scale is when you go down through it, it can help you get pretty doggone close in accuracy of what the wind speed is. How bad can the season be? Need I say, it only takes one landfalling hurricane. Case in point, Andrew. It's the only landfalling storm of that year, but that's all it took. But we always thought it couldn't get no worse than 2005. And then Mother Nature said, let me show you something different, pal. We had 2020 come along and just outdid everything with 30 named storms. When it comes to tropical cyclones, please never let your guard down. As spoken earlier, you saw that cone, the air cone. Guess what? Them things can change a little bit. You always want to stay abreast of what the storm is doing because they can change direction. Hurricane Betsy did back in '65. It changed course twice. Another one back in 1985, a storm named Elena came across Cuba. Looked like it was coming straight on to Mississippi. Got right out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, made a right hook going towards Tampa, Florida. And then when it looked like it was going to make landfall, it said no, it did a 180-degree turn. Come back and hit Gulfport, Mississippi as a Category 3. Mother Nature loves to play with us. Bottom line, stay informed. The time to prepare is now. Never drop your guard. And in closing, after 60 years of service for the Hurricane Watch Net, I hope that the services we brought has been able to help you. I know the information we've been able to get is, I know the Hurricane Center is appreciated, but we're working here for you as well to help you stay abreast of what the storm is doing, and here to help any way we can. I thank you for your time, and thank you for being here at the Hurricane Conference.
Thank you very much, Bobby, for everything, and especially for that award I didn't expect. Anyway, so who we have now is the manager of the VoIP Hurricane Watch Net, which is the one that integrates computers and radios in a network, and they've been extremely useful for many years, bring us information that is between what we get on HF and what we get through other media. So let me see how I can switch that to okay, we got to switch now to the social media. Let's see. This one here.
Here it is.
This one.
We got disconnected, maybe.
Well,
Jim, are you still seeing it connected on Zoom, or?
Yep, I got standby on mine.
I think it got disconnected on this one. We'll probably just have to go back here and reconnect. All right. Yeah, there it is right there. All right, we got it.
Okay, Rob, it's all yours.
All right, you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Are you hearing me okay, Jim? All righty, well, let's get started. So I know we're running a bit behind, so we'll see if we can get through our presentation quickly, but still cover the key content. I want to thank everybody for their understanding on my last minute not being able to attend physically in New Orleans. I appreciate everybody's support. Just a lot of last minute conflicts in our day job at Dell Technologies, so I appreciate everybody's support there. Before we start, I just wanted to make sure I covered a couple of key points here, and one of which is our good friend Julio and his retirement announcement. I consider Julio a legend in amateur radio public service, and kind of a dear friend and brother. And we've done a lot together in over 20 years of service. You can see us pictured here at the WX4NHC ham station. You saw this picture of Julio's team, which, yes, has changed a bit here in recent years. Of course, you can pick out the New Englanders with their shorts on. I'm surprised Julio didn't mention that in his presentation. You see us all here at the standard National Hurricane Conference signs over the years. Julio presenting in New Orleans back in 2017. The Crescent City Amateur Radio Group giving out recognition to our VoIP Hurricane Net, the Hurricane Watch Net, and WX4NHC over the years, still showing the presentations there. And of course, there were always where the real business gets done amongst hurricane hams, the lunches and dinners afterwards. You can see Ken Graham in this photo when he was Hurricane Center Director, now Director of the Weather Service, and just many years of good times, including visits to New England. So Julio has made a couple trips here to New England, presented at our ARRL New England Division Convention back in 2019 and our Southern New England Weather Conference back in 2009. And these are some pictures from our amateur radio station at the National Weather Service in Norton, WX1BOX. And Julio's gotten a few accolades already here today, and he got a very big one back in 2011 from this very National Hurricane Conference. And pictured to the left is KB5FYA Bill Reed and Max Mayfield, both former National Hurricane Center directors back in 2011. And you know, I could go on about this for a long time, but we don't have that time. But Julio, sincerely, thank you for all of your support, your friendship, sharing your skills, really for the benefit of the amateur radio community, but also the community at large. And you've made a world of difference. I know, as you said, it's not going to be a light switch, so I'm sure we'll have you around for a bit longer, even after this year. And I'm certainly hopeful that we're going to get you to come back up here to New England here in the fall, because the New England amateur radio community considers you one of their own, even though you're in Florida. And there's many that would want to give their thank you and gratitude for everything you've done for the hurricane hams, as you call them, and the program at the National Hurricane Center. So thank you, Julio. The other thing I wanted to throw out there, just a little bit of levity, is, well, you know, we're Jim and myself are up from New England, and we're sure used to these pictures, but you're not really used to it in New Orleans. And Joe, I checked in. We check in with our hams that help the hurricane nets and the activations, even when there's hurricanes going on. And I checked in with Joe when you guys were getting the snow down there, nearly a foot of snow. And honestly, that was probably bigger than one of our biggest storms here in New England. We got more snow over the course of the season up here. But a foot of snow out of one storm, I think the most we got out of one storm up here was roughly around 10 inches or so. So you actually beat us in terms of a max snowfall from a specific storm, at least in the southern part of New England. But we check on our ham friends even when it's not during hurricanes. So with that, let me get into the VoIP Hurricane Net and some of the best practices in SKYWARN for tropical systems. The VoIP Hurricane Net, I know it's probably old hat for some, but we are supporting the Hurricane Center with all the various VoIP modes. Echolink and IRLP have been kind of the primary staple, but we've expanded to various other VoIP modes over the last few years, and we'll talk through that. We're also providing, always want the direct firsthand amateur radio reports, or the hams that can relay to their other hams or perhaps friends and family in the affected areas of hurricanes. But we also have expanded to really try and cover online weather stations, social media, public safety feeds, other ways to get information into the Hurricane Center during hurricanes, because it could be any one of those reports that helps with the forecast and the warnings. We're certainly there for interoperability of agencies, and we provide advisories and other warnings and updates for stations in the affected area as need be. And as we talked about, we can connect to other VoIP modes, and we'll talk through that. Our activation policy is basically if we got a means to share information, whether it's over the amateur radio bands or some of these other outlets that we try and monitor and provide information, we will activate in some form to support the Hurricane Center. And we can certainly help and self-activate if we have a suddenly rapidly intensifying storm that becomes a hurricane unexpectedly. We'll talk about Hurricane Otis in the Eastern Pacific, of all places, in 2023, and how that affected Acapulco, Mexico. Certainly can self-activate for non-governmental organizations and government organizations or amateur radio groups that may find our system or our net controls of use to them. And our system is always on and operational. Our Hurricane Net management team will monitor the tropical weather outlooks, tropical advisories, and discussions, and will coordinate with the coordinators at NHC on activation plans. And really, it's with them, it's with the SATERN folks that you'll hear from later, it's with the Hurricane WatchNet folks, all of the teams here. If a system unexpectedly intensifies, our net management team will react and self-activate, and we'll go through a recent example. We use Telegram chat to help coordinate between our net controls and our net management team. And again, we're trying to prep the affected areas and hams to help support the Hurricane Center mission. We have a prep net that meets monthly in the non-hurricane season months of December through May, and weekly in the hurricane season months of June through November. It's a forum where you can ask your questions. We have a question of the week or month. It's a bit of practice for our net controls. Even though net activations are a bit different, it's still a good source of practice. And our website is voipwx.net. Some technical tips. We try to have folks disable Echolink conferencing to avoid unintentional interference. And those tips are on our main menu on how to do that within the Echolink program. For those repeater owners or folks that are using Echolink on their repeaters, we have a means to, you can still have your repeater IDs, courtesy tones, and squelch tails pass over RF, but not over the network. And our tech coordinator, Tony, VK3JED, whose email's on the website, can help you with that, as well as maybe others within our team. And we'll talk a little bit about how between some of Tony's technology and KC5FM and his repeater system, we're able to bring in a lot of these other VoIP modes into our network: All-Star, D-Star, certain types of DMR, M17, Hamshack, Hotline, Fusion, and so many more. There is a new version of the Echolink program that has been released fairly recently in late March. 2.4.140 was released on March 29th. A bunch of new features here. A couple that I'll point out is if you get disconnected, whether you disconnect on your own or unexpectedly get disconnected from the node, you always notice you lose the text in the text box, and you might have information you want there. That's now being retained and just grayed out. And they've also done some work around plug and play to actually get the Echolink to connect and search for the right network type and mode. Which may help with folks, especially first-timers, trying to utilize Echolink on Wi-Fi and so forth. So there's a number of other features, but a couple I wanted to point out there. Then new from 2024 is the Echolink web app, which is webapp.echolink.org. If you have an Echolink account, you can quickly connect in using a web interface, whether on the PC or phone or computer or what have you. So just wanted to recover that again as another way to utilize Echolink. Echolink is also a Droid and Apple app, and they have been recently updated, version 1.8.8 on Echolink and version 2.20.32 on Apple. So take a look at these and make sure your app is fully up to date with the latest changes. Certainly can be helpful during events to make sure you have the latest edition of Echolink loaded across all your devices. As we mentioned, we combine a lot of VoIP modes, and you can see the whole list here. I won't rattle them off again, but KC5FM's repeater system has provided that capability, as has VK3JED through his Megalink system. This has kind of been an evolution that started with some work with QuadNet in the late 2010s, and just allows us to try to monitor that many more modes without having to have net controls on all kinds of different modes, and more people resources needed to do that. So that's really the purpose of trying to do that. We would like to kind of get that actually integrated into our Echolink and IRLP conference. It's been difficult to find the time to kind of get that integrated, so we wouldn't have to bring in Lloyd or Tony's systems, but it still works pretty effectively doing it that way. Our hope is to try to do that here in the future, perhaps for this hurricane season, but I won't guarantee that. Our timeline will be kind of TBD. Some of it will depend on Tony's availability as well as ours, and managing what's happening with the actual hurricane season and how that is going. I mentioned this in a number of presentations on the VoIP Hurricane Net about these concept of network radios. These can be very good if you are tied up with your cell phone trying to use Echolink or Zello or a number of the apps that are out there for VoIP methods that are amateur radio based. Zello, of course, is technically not really amateur radio based, but many folks use it. These network radios are good because it kind of consolidates those modes into an actual radio format and frees up your cell phone for other use. I looked at the pricing of these radios, given everything that's been going back and forth with tariffs. They're actually right now about $10 cheaper than they were last year. And they were running low on supplies, as you might imagine. But I've used some of this equipment. These pictures are of gear that I've used specifically, and they've worked very well. I've used them in hurricane nets and some of our regional activations for SKYWARN here locally in southern New England. We have a lot of different ways to communicate these days, and a lot of different ways information is disseminated. We mentioned Zello, all the different chat apps that are out there, WhatsApp, Telegram, Slack, Signal, you name it, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, TikTok. We can go on and on, all the different social media modes, all the different online weather stations, APRS, CWAP, Davis, Weather Underground, Tempest, etc., and the public safety feeds and monitoring of those. These are ways that if we have the resources to monitor them, we can provide a lot of information into the Hurricane Center. And a lot of this happens in local and regional SKYWARN activations for severe weather and other things at a more local level. When we can do that for the Hurricane Center, it's extremely helpful. And our skills as amateur radio operators really help with that and augment the when all else fails mission. So we've been trying to turn our net into that virtual communication center to do these things with all these modes. We think the situational awareness mission can really help be that force multiplier of getting amateur radio volunteers more involved even when things don't fail, so that when they do, the hams are there to actually support. And in this past season, we had over 600 SKYWARN reportable criteria reports passed on to the Hurricane Center in the 2024 season. And we're looking for more net controls and more folks to monitor some of these resources for us. We have a lot of hams that will monitor from out of area. And it's like, well, how can we get them to help us? And I think part of it certainly is net control, and part of it is trying to have them get trained and help us monitor some of these resources, because I think it could help provide that situational awareness picture and have more eyes and ears monitoring different things that can be of great help and support. And our management team can help to vet the information, and if we're not comfortable with vetting it, we can always keep it to within our net circles. So something that we're really pushing harder on for this year. You can see the number of activations over the years. 2024 was a busy year. It was 8 total systems that were activated, but 14 total activations, including 4 for Beryl alone, for 4 different landfall points that we'll talk to here shortly. I'm going to mention a couple systems from 2023, one of which was Adalia, where we had some good information from hams in Key West, Florida, that relayed information from hams and people that they knew up in the Perry, Florida area. So that was very helpful to us. And I want to show you, though, that the Big Bend of Florida, which hadn't really seen much hurricane activity over the last 100 years, has seen quite a bit in the last 2 years. And what you'll notice here is there are very few weather stations along that part of the coastline, which means we don't get a lot of reports. There's like a wildlife refuge in that area. And so the Big Bend area was also significantly impacted, particularly by Helene, but also Milton, also a weaker hurricane this past year, Debbie. And you'll see here in this Adalia report that they mentioned the landfall is 100 knots with a lot of uncertainty because of the lack of surface observation stations in the area. So that is something to think about in terms of how we can help with some of our resources to provide more observations from some of these rural areas, even talking here in the United States. This is some of the structural damage from Adalia that we captured from social media, and some of which came from the Florida State Guard social media outlets. And then we mentioned Otis, Mexico earlier. This was a system that rapidly intensified into a Category 5 hurricane. It was forecast to barely be a Category 1. When I caught wind that this was occurring, and it was happening in the middle of the night, East Coast and Central Coast time, very hard to ramp up a response from an amateur radio perspective. However, through monitoring of social media, we were able to gather some information. Some of these damage photos here you see on the right-hand side, wind gusts as high as 205 miles per hour, likely as reported by some of the civil defense officials in Acapulco, Mexico. And you can see quite a bit of damage here. And, these hotels are usually built to withstand some significant hurricane strikes. The fact that you got some of this damage here in some of these high-rise hotel buildings gives you an idea of the type of destruction this hurricane caused. This was at a local hospital, which had to be evacuated. And a lot of this information was on social media and shared with the Hurricane Center to help give a picture of what was happening on the ground. As we turn to this year, you look at Hurricane Beryl. Its biggest strike was in the Grenadines, St. Vincent, Carriacou. I know we have a ham in the on the live stream that lived through a lot of the significant damage here. Some of those reports and information was relayed from his area by Juliet 69 Delta Sierra in St. Lucia. So we were able to get a lot of reports relayed from him from the affected area via the VoIP Hurricane Net and WindLink. St. Vincent had pretty significant damage. Barbados and St. Lucia less so. The Grenadines through St. Vincent was the area of significant impacts. And when you look at some of these pictures, I mean, this is like tornado-like damage. You can even see in the mountainsides of the hills here some of the destruction that occurred with Beryl, and that was the heaviest impact I think arguably we saw almost of any hurricane other than Helene, with the catastrophic flooding in western North Carolina. Beryl then would make a close pass to Jamaica, though not making landfall there. There was damage to structures, trees, and wires, damage at the airport as reported on social media. We did have a ham at the Spanish Town, Jamaica EOC that reported wind damage and river flooding, closing the Bogwalk Gorge due to rainfall flooding. Weather station had a 74-mile-per-hour wind gust, with 85% of the island without power at the peak of Beryl. It then went through Mexico and did make a landfall there, probably the weakest landfall of all of them that Beryl made. Wind gusts as high as 85 miles per hour. Again, some of the photos of damage and the online weather stations that we were able to capture were the sources of the wind reports. As you look at Beryl on the Texas Gulf Coast, that was definitely a more formidable hit of all hazards. The wind damage, the flooding, both heavy rain and storm surge were prevalent here. Wind gusts as high as 98 miles per hour in Matador, Texas. And we had a dozen hams that checked in through some of the hams that were out of the affected area. They connected us in with some of the hams that were in the affected area. And we gathered a number of reports from those amateurs as Beryl made landfall and was going through the Houston area. But you can kind of see how if we can put all these reports together, we really can come up with a good situational awareness picture. Wanted to make sure we covered Francine since that was a strike on Louisiana. Obviously, there had been bigger hurricanes that have affected Louisiana than Francine, but nonetheless, wind gusts as high as 105 miles per hour in Eugene, Louisiana. For the New Orleans area, it was a big-time flood threat, and we had a number of reports of flooding, including in Joe's area where the flooding was unusual for where he was. And there was over 9 inches of rain recorded in Old Metairie, Louisiana from KG5HAV-JT, whose weather station was online, and we monitored and put in the report for that area. And you could also notice that some of the structural damage was kind of very like concentrated and a bit of some of the mesoscale effects of this particular hurricane. And then there was Helene. And as you saw from Bob's presentation from the Canadian Hurricane Center, the peak was well over 4 million, more like over 7 million without power across the southeast and midwestern U.S. And we had amateur radio friends in the Cincinnati, Ohio area that were impacted with wind damage. That's how extensive Helene was. And this was well after it had weakened from a hurricane and became post-tropical. A shout out to the hams that really did a phenomenal job with the relief and situational awareness support in Western North Carolina. And what was great was there was a Broadcastify link from W4HTP that broadcasted the repeater in the area so you could hear what was going on. And I think it was brilliant to hear a lot of the local activity with the coordination of relief support and the situational awareness. You can see that the wind gusts were as high as 103 miles per hour, but again, it went through that Big Bend to Florida area, and I really think there were higher winds that just were not detected. So you can see some of the photos of the damage to the right from an amateur radio operator here, some of the tree damage all the way up into Georgia. And then these are some of the catastrophic flooding photos. In the left-hand picture, you probably think that's a picture over a river, and that's really a highway that is completely submerged in flooding. That was from the North Carolina DOT. And then you see pictures on the right from Asheville, North Carolina. And then the 2 photos in the center in Swanoa, North Carolina, believe it or not, that is what that area looks like within the last few days. There is still a lot of recovery and relief work that's needed for Western North Carolina, and something I wanted to point out. And again, literally probably hundreds, if not 1,000 miles inland from where Helene made landfall. We then had Hurricane Milton, and again, a lot of information coming in from amateurs within our net. One of our hams that used to live in our area sent us along these damaged photos from Bradenton, Florida, which had a peak wind gust of 109 miles per hour. You could see some of the antenna and tree damage near his home location. And of course, the St. Petersburg, Florida, the Tropicana Stadium roof damage that was initially reported by amateur radio operators. And you can see the train damage also in St. Petersburg. These photos were courtesy of the police department. And then these damage photos here from Treasure Island, Florida. All of these captured off of social media. So we're continuing our preparations, net control, and kind of that resource monitoring, resources and training support, trying to also expand into our reach again into the affected areas. Some of the work we talked about on the multi-VoIP mode technologies, and then we're continuing to try to deepen our coordination with our listen-only capability. We have a number of folks that help and make sure we have listen-only and live stream capabilities when we activate our net, and we thank them for their support. So just briefly talking about best practices in SKYWARN for tropical systems that have weakened, they're not hurricanes or just tropical storms or become post-tropical cyclones. As we've seen, even with a system like Helene and some other systems that have come up our way to New England, they can be just as formidable as some of these hurricanes. And it may not require a hurricane net activation or activation of WX4NHC, but for your local area, it's important to support your local weather service, emergency management, etc., in these situations. Back in 2021, we had Tropical Storm Henri up here in southern New England. It was forecast to maintain hurricane strength as it made landfall. It didn't. This was a rare case where we had nets active because we thought it was going to be a hurricane and it weakened to a tropical storm, but we were passing a flow of information up to through our local weather service office and into WX4NHC. Some of the photos, some of the damage that we had. Hardest hit was Rhode Island and to a lesser extent, my part of Southeast Massachusetts. And this was now the retired hurricane specialist, Stacy Stewart, thanking our community for their efforts and to pass that along to the radio net. So this is very important. This is what the hurricane specialists view as a key value that we provide. And this was a case where communications weren't necessarily down, but they got a good sense of what was happening. Ida was obviously a big major hurricane for the state of Louisiana. Well, it had impacts all the way up here into southern New England. I had 9 inches of rain from the remnants of Ida. And this was some of the flooding that we had. We had a couple of tornadoes and microbursts from the remnants of Ida. So that was a critical local activation for our area to support our local weather service and emergency management. This nor'easter, which actually became fully tropical and became Wanda in the middle of the North Atlantic, this was probably the biggest damage producer for winds in our area since our last landfalling hurricane, Hurricane Bob in 1991. This system did a lot of damage, very extensive, like we were hit by a hurricane, especially Southeast Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We had Henri earlier in this year when this nor'easter hit in 2021. This system produced more power outages than Henri. And we had an extended activation on the Cape and Islands because of the wind damage and power outages that occurred. So just an example of some of these other systems that happen that can cause issues. Last year we had, or a couple of years back, we had Lee that did some damage to trees and power lines. It was a bigger hit to the Canadian Maritimes, which, by the way, has been impacted by a significant tropical system in at least 4 of the last 6 years. This was a case where we also shared information with FEMA Region 1 at their request. Some of the damage reports, especially if trees were hitting structures, etc., that was shared with FEMA, both in our area and in parts of Maine, which was also impacted by this system. So as a SKYWARN or Aries coordinator, don't assume the media has it covered. Make your preparations and provide this kind of support, because we can help be a force multiplier in that situational awareness data gathering. And then if things do fail and it deteriorates to that point, people are in position from an amateur radio perspective to handle that situation. So this is a lot of our IRLP Echolink information on the VoIP Hurricane Net, both our website, our social media. We have a Groups.io email list that you can join. This is the contact information for myself and some of our net management staff from the Hurricane Net. And then just a quick ARRL history lesson. Obviously, we have Josh Johnston in the room today, Director of Emergency Management, and his 2 predecessors, Mike Corey, KI1U, when the title was Manager of Emergency Preparedness and Response. He now works at FEMA Region 1, held the role that Josh had under a slightly different title from 2010 to 2019, and kind of the first person to be hired in this role, Dennis Dura, K2DCD, it continues to be our assistant for the VoIP Hurricane Net and involved in, as Julio calls it, the Hurricane Ham program. And they provide a lot of expertise, and even those that aren't in the role are still kind of helping amateur radio in different capacities than they were before. So with that concludes my presentation. And I want to thank everyone for their time and their patience for allowing me to present remotely today. And we have best wishes to Julio as he winds down his work with NHC. And we thank him for all his support. And I'll turn it back over to the room.
That works. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna have to cut all this out. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of doing it. There we go. Okay. Bill, you have your,
It should be on there. I gave Jim the,
you got it, Jim? SATERN? Okay, it's not here. By the way, we will have, if you want to pass these around, here. You want to pass these around? I think everybody will get a prize.
just stick it in the USB port here. Okay.
Okay, which one is it? Which one is it?
I can't read it from there. Let me.
Go ahead. That's it, okay, all right. I will drag it over here. Okay.
Get it full screen, just.
It's this one here, right?
Let's see here. There you go. Yeah, there
Okay.
it is. There it is. It's now play.
Here we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, you know how to use this thing? That's your next slide, that one.
This one's the next slide?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Feist, WB8BZH. I'm the Southern Territory SATERN Coordinator for the Salvation Army. In the audience here, we have Joe Badsett, who's our Assistant Southern Territory SATERN Coordinator. And I just want to mention that Joe has just written a book that's going to be published in November called Emergency Communications 101. And it's basically for families who are wanting to put together an emergency communications plan for their family. So just want you to be aware of that. Okay. I want you to just take a look at the mission statement of the Salvation Army very quickly here. I want you to take note that at the end of that mission statement, we mentioned there are two missions that are mentioned in the mission statement. One is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the second is to meet human needs in His name without discrimination. Now that second point is important in understanding the Salvation Army. One way to preach the word is to demonstrate the word by meeting people at their point of need, such as in disasters, including emergency communications that allow survivors to communicate their situation with their family. Well, let's see here. There we go. Okay, we're going to talk a moment about disaster management, if we can get this to advance. There we go. I think I'll just use the button. Anyways, Salvation Army has two primary disaster missions. One is fixed and mobile mass feeding, and the other is emotional and spiritual care. We also have some secondary missions, which include bulk distribution, such as cleanup kits, food boxes, clothing, and so on. Disaster social services, which includes financial assistance to meet immediate post-disaster needs, and then short and long-term recovery to help people rebuild post-disaster after the disaster. Now, the Salvation Army uses the Incident Command System to manage its response to disaster events. All of our professional paid disaster staff members in the Salvation Army's Southern Territory are either certified or associate emergency managers through the International Association of Emergency Management. Now, for those of you in the audience, I'm going to say that most states, if not all of the states, also have a certified emergency manager program that's usually available through the state's Professional Emergency Management Association. And I encourage those in nonprofit organizations, particularly those in leadership positions, to think about becoming certified, at least within their state, in emergency management. An important point that I want to make about the chain of command, and that is that, of course, we have, like any organization, we have different levels of headquarters. Ultimately, it's our divisions. The Salvation Army is split up into 4 territories. The territories are split up into divisions. The ultimate responsibility for the response to a disaster in any specific division belongs to the divisional commander. Territorial headquarters doesn't come in and tell the divisional commander what to do. They come in to support the division. National headquarters doesn't come in and tell the territory what to do. They come in to support the territory. So it's very much a top-down arrangement, very much like what FEMA uses and emergency management uses. Preparing for a disaster. This is a big job. And to properly prepare for an incoming hurricane, the first thing affected levels do, that would be national territory divisions, is they select one or more incident management teams and notify them to be on standby for a possible deployment. They can sometimes be either deployed or put to work to help the disaster director in the division do all the things that need to be done. At the local level, selection and notification of those who may be deployed to a disaster site for things such as feeding services and emotional and spiritual care also begin almost immediately. The IMAT helps the division make arrangements for transportation and lodging to follow quickly on as for people who are going to be deployed. They begin to monitor the hang on a second. They begin to monitor the strength and forecasted direction of the storm. They almost simultaneously begin two-way conversations within the Army between the various levels, national, territory, divisional, and local levels. For potentially serious disasters, this may include periodic or even daily coordination calls that may involve their key partners, other levels within the Salvation Army. In the Southern Territory, SATERN is a part of those calls. We begin to work with our emergency management partners at the various levels. National headquarters works with the FEMA National Response Coordination Center. Our territorial levels work with the regional response and coordination centers. The divisions work with their state EOCs and state emergency management. Our local units begin to work with their local county EMAs and EOCs. We also begin to work with our partners, most of whom are a part of voluntary organizations active in disaster, or VOAD. Folks like the Southern Baptist, the Red Cross, and Catholic Charities, and there's like 60 or 70 different members in National VOAD. And we start working with all of these different partners so that we can coordinate our activities together, so that we can identify gaps in services, identify duplications of services, so that everybody has a job to do, but there's not too much being done in one area, but nothing being done in another. We begin two-way communications with our vendors for food, for supplies, equipment, shipping, and so on. We start rechecking our equipment, doing any maintenance and vehicle checks that have to be done. We begin to explore rental possibilities or leasing possibilities for equipment that we might need that we don't have. We start searching for warehouse space, because if it's a large disaster, chances are we're going to need a warehouse in that local area, and warehouse space goes very fast. So you've got to go in there and find that warehouse space as quickly as possible. In short, there's a tremendous amount of work with a lot of moving parts in preparing for a major disaster such as a hurricane. Excuse me. I make mention of all this because it is important that although emergency communications is absolutely important to a disaster response, it's not the only thing that our served agencies are doing or worried about. Emergency communications and ourselves as emergency communicators are not the focus of the response. And the moment we begin to think we are, we have lost sight of the larger and very important other missions of our served agencies, and we don't want to do that. Very quickly, a word about our nets. We do have an international net that meets on 20 meters 4 days a week, and we have a national digital voice net that meets once a week. You can find details about that on SATERNusa.org. It'll tell you the days and times and frequencies and so on. For hurricanes, the international net activates alongside the Hurricane Watch Net in support of our memorandum of understanding with them. As Bobby talked about earlier, HWN's mission is to receive and relay on-the-air weather and storm damage reports to and from the National Hurricane Center. Our mission is to receive and deliver outbound, I want to say that, outbound health and welfare messages from the disaster area. We do not accept inbound health and welfare inquiries that are going into the disaster area. We simply do not have the resources to be able to deliver those kinds of messages. Our territorial, divisional, and local SATERN nets are active as they are needed, activated as they are needed within their jurisdiction. Finally, I want to take a moment to talk about something that is new that we're getting into within the Salvation Army. National Headquarters has received a large grant to purchase a number of rapid response units, or RRUs, for each of the 4 territories in the United States. RRUs, as you can see in the pictures, are relatively small, heavy-duty vehicles capable of delivering somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 meals and drinks to hard-to-access areas, areas where our large mobile kitchens cannot get into. Each of these RRUs has a Starlink unit built into the vehicle. Excuse me. The Southern Territory will be receiving 16 RRUs, 2 for each of our 8 divisions within the territory. The first one arrived just 4 months ago. We've had several others arrive. We expect the final one to arrive by the end of the year, we hope. The mission of all of those Southern Territory RRUs with the Starlink capabilities are twofold. Obviously, part of the mission is to feed and hydrate people on scene. The other part of the mission is to use the Starlink capability for two purposes. Now, and let me say before I get into the purposes, these Starlinks are really easy to use. 5-year-old could use these. You push one button to turn on the inverter that provides the power to the RRU, and it's on. 2 minutes later, you've got Wi-Fi. I mean, even I could do it. So, I mean, it's really, really simple. It'll broadcast a Wi-Fi signal about 175 to 200 feet from the RRU. The modem, which you can see on the left there in the inset picture, it can be taken out and set outside of the vehicle to broaden that coverage area somewhat. Now, I mentioned missions. One of those, of course, is to allow disaster survivors to phone home, to let the family know their situation. And the other is to allow our disaster relief personnel on scene to be able to contact our command post, our IMAT, that's responsible for keeping them supplied, to let them know if they need more supplies, to let them know the status of things. And all of this can be done through email, through phone, cell phone hooked through Wi-Fi, and through text. One of the other things we're looking at doing with this is device charging, so that survivors can bring their electronic devices, their phones, their tablets, their computers, and charge those up for use after we leave. We've just started on working on the guidelines for that. In fact, Joe and I and our territorial disaster coordinator, Jeff Delitz, who's here at the conference, we sat and we spent most of the morning talking about the guidelines and some other issues going on with SATERN. Each of the 8 divisions in our Southern Territory have a portable Starlink. Territorial headquarters has 2 more, so that's an additional, 10 portable Starlink units. These units can be easily and quickly transported even by common carriers such as FedEx or UPS and shipped to a disaster site very, very quickly. And they are used for on-site support of our IMATs, our command post, a staging area, a bulk distribution center, or a disaster social services center, or to allow disaster services to, again, make contact with their family outside of the disaster area. There's more information about all of this and about SATERN in general on our website. You can go to saternusa.org, or if you want information about the Salvation Army's disaster services, the broader service beyond SATERN, because SATERN is just part of our disaster services department. You can find that at disaster.salvationarmyusa.org. And that wraps up my presentation.
Thank you, Bill. All righty. And next we have Josh Johnson, KB5HAV. He's the Director of Emergency Management for the American Radio Relay League. And I think you have it? Okay.
Here's the tickets.
Oh, fantastic. You want to put it right here?
Yep.
This slide.
I got it. I could see other than my bifocals. There we go. All right. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here today. I know we are running late. I think I can get us a little closer. I can't get us back. I think we're about 45 minutes over right now, so I can't get us back to there. But it's been an interesting year for us. We've had floods. We've had snowstorms. As you know, we've had hurricanes. And for us at ARRL headquarters, we have experienced a cyber attack this year. We literally had a ransomware attack in May. Just as we were all leaving to go to Dayton Hamvention, we found out we had no computer systems, no computers, and I'll be honest, we're still working to get completely back from it. I've talked to another tribal group that has gone through a very similar situation a little over a year ago, and they're still not completely back. Most of our major systems are all back up and running and have been now for a number of time. It's the little things. It's our reporting. It's some of the small things. But we're working to get all those back. So happy to say that as we have come back, thanks to the leadership of our CEO and our board of directors, they're not just bringing things back online. They're overcorrecting, not even overcorrecting, but they're making the changes that should have been made maybe a number of years ago and bringing us back much more secure, much better off, and really with better hardware and better systems than what we've had to this point. So communications is key. There again, I'm going to rush through some of this because some of this you have heard. We really work hard to get information out. We try, when Bobby gets us information, we try to get it out as soon as possible. Try to get information shared out because we do have our Aries letter, for instance, that goes out monthly. We have about 34,000 that receive that letter monthly. So we try to get that out as quickly as possible. Any information we can with our news crawl and our news feed. Thanks to our media relations director, I think we've improved that from where it had gotten for a little while. I know y'all had a really good relationship years ago, and things kind of fell off, and we've worked to try to get it back to where it needed to be. A little bit of an update on where we're going and some of the things that we've done. We're revamping our training program. We've got our new basic and intermediate courses are available online now. They are primarily at this point developed for online courses, but they will eventually offer field deployment of some of those courses as well. Our advanced course is on hold right now. We're working with the folks at CISA on possible updates to the Oxcom program, and we may make some changes to our advanced course depending on what that encompasses. So also our Aries task book, for those of you that use the Aries task book and follow with it, that course or that task book has been updated to reflect the new courses. And the thing that I like to emphasize is our national level task book, our courses are the basic level of training that we recommend for Aries. We get people that are really hung up on, well, this is what the national task book says. I want to add more. Oh, great. We encourage you to add more training than what our national level. Ours is the minimum standard, not the maximum standard. So we encourage you at your local levels, if you have training that you want to add or incorporate or require, then we encourage that. Let's see. We do also have an Aries leadership course. It is actually out of editing and waiting for my final read through as soon as I get some time to read through it. Those of you that are familiar with Ken Bailey, who was with us for 14 years, Ken retired this year, which, by the way, those of us in this group, Rob listening and you guys, y'all can go ahead and take Ken's email out because right now I'm getting all of his emails. So every email you guys send, I'm getting in my inbox and Ken's inbox. That's a side note. But one of the things we're really pushing with all of our members and Aries teams and SECs and stuff around the country is building those relationships ahead of time. And it's exactly what everyone's talked about here today is building those relationships and the need. And if the first time you're having a conversation is at a disaster, you've waited way too late to have those conversations. You're going to hear a lot of things this year because it's an exciting year for Aries. There's a lot of anniversaries this year. This is the 90th year of Aries. Amateur radio emergency service was started in 1935, and it's still going today. And you're going to hear some new terminology, not necessarily new. I know it was involved with our 75th, but one of the things we're really working on is some verbiage around ready, responsive, and resilient. It's what we all are. It's what we all should strive to be. Bobby, with what you guys do with the Hurricane Net, Rob and the VoIP Net, and especially you guys at the National Hurricane Center, that's exactly what you guys are, and you're the epitome of what we're talking about when we talk about ready, responsive, and resilient. So thank you all for that. To get into kind of the next slide, one of the things the ARRL board did this last year is really pushed an initiative to get youth involved in a different way than we've ever thought about before, and to work on our STEM initiative, and to work through our Teachers Institute to bring teachers technology and curriculum that can be used in STEM education. Amateur radio is a prime source for sciences and technologies. And the way it can be used, Steve Goodgame, our learning and leadership manager, is really doing a good job. He's a school teacher from Mississippi, and he's come to Connecticut because he believes in bringing youth into the hobby by teaching and training teachers what a value it can be. We had a space mission yesterday. Think about how many radios were involved in that space mission yesterday, between telemetry, between video feeds, between radio feeds, voice communications, everything else. There was a lot of radio going on just for that 11-minute flight. So that's one of our big things. Another program we talk a little bit about, and it's really one that sometimes gets left off the radar, but it's a prime example of how important our collegiate program is, and the collegiate amateur radio program. And we often talk about that front end, people in college that get involved in amateur radio. Sometimes we get to follow that full circle. And after 45 years, an amateur radio volunteer from a college amateur radio club spent 45 years volunteering at the National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, and is the epitome of what we look for and strive to do with our amateur radio collegiate program. And Julio, thank you. I also have something for you. The ARRL Board of Directors honors Julio Ripoll-WD4R for 45 years of dedicated service to the National Hurricane Center. Presented by Rick Roderick, K5UR President, and David Minster, NA2AA, on today's date, April 15th, 2025. Wow. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. It's honored.
Thank you. Right. It's important for us to recognize volunteers like Julio, because this is what our organization stands for. And our organization is here to support the type of volunteers that Julio has been for 45 years. And to end my part of the presentation on something I try to close most of my emails, at least to my section emergency coordinators and to others. Thank you for all you do for amateur radio and your community, because it really is about serving your community. Thank you very much, and thanks again.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. I didn't expect that. And yeah, I'm telling you. But no, it is very important to get young people involved and have them understand that this is not just a contraption that you talk into, but what you do can make a difference in someone else's life. And finally, we have somebody that's very special that lives in this area. to talk about the 20th anniversary and what you experienced through Hurricane Katrina. So I think you know how to do this better than I do. Let's see. There we go. I think I got it.
All right, thank you all for coming today. My name's Matt Anderson. Been a volunteer with the GOSAP State Emergency Operations Center, I guess since about 2003. Just wanted to go over a little bit about some of the stuff that we saw from our perspective there at the state EOC, and some of the stories from some of the guys that were on the ground here in the New Orleans area. We kind of went over some of this information already about the storm. Like I say, a lot of us were watching it, really didn't know what to expect at the time with the different reports coming in. We talked about the amount of flooding, 80% of the city, the communication systems, y'all probably heard a lot about that. And some of that wasn't just because of the storm or the flooding. Like one particular instance was the 800 megahertz trunk radio system for the city. The reason why they lost it is a piece of debris had damaged a generator, and all the water ran out of it. The generator overheated and shut down, and they couldn't get a repair technician in to fix it for a couple days. I was going back through my stuff when they called me the other day, and I found this old email from Rob. It was the night before of the storm. Looked like I got home about 3 o'clock in the morning. Sent out an update. We were still on RLP back then, and I was just looking at the description here where they talked about some overtopping may occur on the levees. So turned out to be a little worse, I guess, but nobody knew at the time. Here's a photo from the state EOC. A couple of volunteers on the right. I believe the guy in the background actually got deployed down here, got stuck, and we finally got him a ride, and he came back to the state EOC and hung out with us for a few days. The guy in the blue shirt on the left is one of the state senators. He found out we had a radio link back to his area, and he came in and we let him make some contacts, and he was able to get some information and provide some assistance in his area. Talk about a little bit about the radio networks that we used during the event. HF was primarily through our Aries net. We had a full-time net for about 4 or 5 days, and then it kind of dropped off to about 12 hours a day after a while. A lot of that was coordinating with other states and the northern parts of the states as they were trying to get information from us and pass information back. VHF was widely used in this area. If you all are familiar with Louisiana, we got the state EOC over on the left-hand side. That's north of the lake there. Hammond is one of our cities to the north. And we had the Washington Parish Emergency Operations Center, our Aries Emergency Coordinator for the state. He works with them up there, and we were able to establish a VHF link up to them and maintain communication with them for a while. The other link we had set up was a UHF link going down here to New Orleans, and that ran through a tower we had over in Sorrento that's about halfway between here and Baton Rouge. It was probably one of the best sites we've ever had. We had a link antenna at 330 feet on 1 7/8" feed line, so we could talk to just about any UHF system in the city here. The role of the hams during the event was the critical communications was the initial thing that we did a lot of. It was the rescue calls. After that, it was coordinating supplies. In the beginning, it was fuel, and then it later turned out to be some other requests. The health and welfare, we didn't get involved in a whole lot of that at the state EOC, but there was a lot of that going on some of the local frequencies. Some of the challenges that we had was the access restrictions. Not all the hams were affiliated with EOC, so they had trouble getting into certain areas. Of course, the flooding prevented access to a lot of the areas. Fuel shortage, that's, you know, still a problem today. You want to come help, but there's not enough fuel for you to drive back and forth. And interoperability, that was pretty much on all levels, not just ham radio, but in the public safety sectors. Again, rescue was our first and priority messages, supplies, and medical requests. And that's when it kind of got interesting with the medical requests, because they started asking for stuff, names that we couldn't even pronounce. So we had to wind up calling somebody off the floor from the hospital association to help us translate that. A couple of interesting stories that happened down here is the fuel was always an issue. So at first, you know, people would say, hey, we need 500 gallons of diesel. We'd take that down, turn it in. Come to find out, some of these generators are on rooftops, and there was no way to get the fuel from the truck to the roof. So we found out real quick that was going to be an issue. So every time somebody called for fuel, we always asked those follow-up questions to try to relay the information back to the emergency management people. The next interesting story was over here at the St. Claude Bridge, just down the road here from the French Quarter. One of the hams was in the area several days after the storm. The bridge was up, National Guard unit shows up, they need to go to the other side in order to do whatever task they had assigned to them. Well, unfortunately, there was no bridge operator. So he gets on the radio, calls us, we get a hold of the people at the EOC. Turns out they had the bridge up because they were bringing barges back and forth trying to repair the levees. After a little bit of back and forth, they finally found an operator to go over there to lower the bridge and get them access to the area. One other incident that happened was I was on the way to EOC one day and I heard some unusual call signs on the radio and didn't think anything of it at first. Got the EOC, found out it was some National Guard people. They were in town, they were working around the Superdome, and they were having trouble communicating. Well, apparently one of them was a ham. He tuned around, found the repeater that was still on the air, got on there and said, hey, can we use your repeater for a couple days? They said, hey, no problem, whatever it takes, you know. So they were on there for a while. A few days later, apparently they got some other equipment in. The guy came back on and thanked us for letting us use it, and they moved on to another frequency, I guess. And the last story that was kind of interesting is one of the hams was stuck at one of the pump stations, and they were trapped there for a few days, and he was talking to another one of the hams on the local repeater. So the guy felt sorry for him, so he goes and finds the guys some steaks. He's going to be nice and deliver them some food. Well, he gets there. The pump station's in the middle of a lake. There's no way to get to it. So they get on the radio and find somebody with a boat, and they were able to deliver some food over to these guys, and they were happy as can be to have a nice meal after a couple days of being stuck. I'll kind of skip past some of this for time, but there's a report that came out after Katrina in 2006, talks about amateur radio and some of the responders that came in. It specifically mentions ARRL and ARES and a lot of the things that happened. So going forward, you know, we've been looking at the lessons learned from this and what we can do to change things. The protocol, like y'all just said a minute ago, it's better to know the people before something bad happens than just show up off the street. At least, you know, if you know them, they know what they can expect out of you. The preparedness training, that's always important. Self-sufficiency. As we kind of develop our plans, we're always looking at this PACE plan, and I don't know, most of y'all probably seen this before, but what are we going to use as our primary system, our alternate, our backup? We're getting more into the data modes now because of those incidences where they need something. It's hard to take all this information over the radio a lot. So the state has come up with this resource request form. Everything in this state goes through WebEOC. I saw they're out here on the floor, so they probably do a lot of stuff with most emergency management agencies. Well, that's a lot of information to fill out by voice. So we've kind of developed a form where we've simplified this into a CSV file. On the left-hand side, you can see the 22 line items. We can actually send that file over the air, and they have the ability to take that file and upload it directly in the web EOC, which kind of saves you a lot of time of having to type it all over again. The message comes directly from the agency and gets directly uploaded into the system. Another picture that I found when I was going through my stuff 10 years ago, we met over at West Jefferson Medical Center over here on the other side of the lake. And they had a special event station talking about the 10-year anniversary. And the one thing I'll just leave y'all with is, you know, we were able to provide a service. A lot of people are concerned now that, well, hey, all these people have Starlink and everything else. And, you know, those things work great, but they're not going to work good in all situations. I think there's still going to be a need for us in the initial aftermath until some of those other systems can come online. And I appreciate y'all coming, and thank y'all for your time. Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you very much, Matt. And we appreciate your service here. And we're gonna skip the questions and answers because I think we have the answers. And let's go directly to door prizes. And I think there's a good chance you'll get a door prize. Okay. And we have,
We did ask if there's any questions on the live stream, but no one's given us any yet.
good.
We did have one. It's actually for Bobby, so I'll hand it to him and let him field it later. Okay.
Alrighty, so
I can answer it for you.
we've got, I don't know who belongs to these people, so I'm just gonna mix them up and read some numbers, okay? Is that all right? I don't think I need a hat or anything. No. Okay, 76. There you go. There you go, 76. By the way, I'm keeping these numbers for the grand prize, all right? Then there's 78. There's 78. They left? Okay, then there's 74. There we go.
Going with another radio?
Yeah,
Here.
I got 4. There we go, there we go.
We'll combine some stuff. Getting a radio.
Now you have to get your license. Okay, now, don't get random. 75, there we go.
You're getting the same thing.
But all the stuff on the website is $26.
77, there we go.
I'll call this one.
Yes, call
Okay.
that one. Then I'll call the or you can call the grand prize.
All right. Let's see, got some Hurricane Washington hats, ending in 579.
All right, so Josh put 579 in front of me.
Okay, so that's gone, so you got 4 tickets, so
All right.
there's enough for everybody.
Oh, yeah. 577.